Hi, I'm Emily, a determined single mom. Before I get into my story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life tales. I always imagined my pregnancy surrounded by a loving family, but life had different plans. It was during my 7th month, typically a time when most expectant moms are nesting and finalizing baby preparations, that my world began to fall apart. "Emily, we need to talk about rent," my father said one evening, completely catching me off guard. "Rent?" I asked, confused and a bit scared. I thought I was staying here rent-free, especially with the baby on the way. My mother's voice was cold and firm. "We've reconsidered. It's only fair that you contribute financially if you're going to stay here." "But I can't afford rent right now," I pleaded, my hands trembling as they rested on my swollen belly. "I'm about to go on maternity leave, and you know Alex's dad isn't in the picture." "We can't just support you and a baby," my father said, his voice devoid of the warmth I once knew. "You need to be responsible, Emily." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Please, I promise I'll pay you back once I start working again. Can't we work something out?" Their faces were unmoved. "If you can't pay, you'll need to find somewhere else to live," my mother said firmly. Heartbroken and with no other choice, I packed my things. The next few days were a blur of tears and desperation until Sarah, a friend from college, reached out. "You can stay with me as long as you need, Emily. Don't worry about rent, just focus on getting ready for the baby." Her kindness was a beacon in my darkest time. Moving in with Sarah felt like a breath of fresh air. Her small apartment became a sanctuary, a place filled with hope and laughter, so different from the coldness of my parents' home. We spent our evenings chatting about baby names and decorating a corner of her living room with baby Alex's things. "How could they just throw you out like that? It's unbelievable," Sarah often said, struggling to mask her frustration. "I don't know, Sarah," I would reply, trying to stay strong. "It hurts, but right now, all I can focus on is Alex and making sure he has a peaceful entrance into the world." As the countdown to Alex's arrival began, I found comfort in the little nest Sarah and I had created for him. It wasn't the support-filled pregnancy I had envisioned, but it was wrapped in genuine care and love. Something I hoped to give my son in abundance was love. The day Alex was born was the happiest of my life. As I held him for the first time, feeling his tiny fingers curl around mine, I knew I would do anything to protect him. The hardships of the past few months seemed to melt away, replaced by a fierce love and determination. Just a few weeks into motherhood, while I was still adjusting to sleepless nights and the constant demands of a newborn, my parents reached out. It was unexpected and honestly unwelcome. "Emily, we want to meet Alex," my mother's voice came through the phone, as if nothing had happened. "We're his grandparents, after all." "Why now?" I asked, my voice tight with a mix of anger and anxiety. "You kicked me out when I needed you most." "We were just trying to teach you responsibility," my mother replied, her tone suggesting this was supposed to be obvious. "We always had Alex's best interests at heart." "Best interests? You left your pregnant daughter homeless. I don't trust your intentions now," I snapped back, cradling Alex a little closer. The conversation ended abruptly with my mother's parting words. "We'll see. He's our grandson." As news of their sudden interest in Alex spread through the family, reactions were mixed. My Uncle John called one afternoon, his voice filled with concern. "Emily, your parents are really upset. Maybe you should let them see Alex. It might mend things a bit." "I can't just forget what they did, Uncle John. How can I trust them with Alex when they showed no mercy to us?" I argued. "Family is supposed to forgive," he countered, echoing the sentiment of several relatives. Amidst the family pressure, Sarah remained my steadfast supporter. "You don't owe them anything, Emily. They should earn your trust first," she would remind me during our late-night talks after Alex had finally settled down. Their continued attempts to be part of Alex's life only deepened my resolve to protect him from their instability. One Saturday, they showed up unannounced at Sarah's apartment, causing an uncomfortable confrontation. "We have every right to see him," my father exclaimed, standing at the door with frustration evident in his stance. "You gave up those rights when you threw us out. Alex needs stability, love, and protection. All things you didn't provide when I needed them," I responded, holding the door firm while Alex napped quietly in the other room. As they left, their expressions mixed with anger and disbelief, I felt a twinge of guilt but knew I had made the right decision. Motherhood had taught me that protecting Alex was my top priority, no matter the emotional cost. In the weeks that followed, the family rift only deepened. Some relatives whispered about my ungrateful attitude, while others quietly commended my courage. Through it all, I focused on Alex, his smiles and needs providing the strength I needed to face each day. Despite the turmoil, I never regretted my decision. As I watched Alex grow, each milestone was a reminder of the life we were building together, just the two of us, a small but unbreakable family forged in the fires of adversity. Months after Alex was born, while rocking him to sleep one quiet night, I couldn't shake the feeling of injustice that gnawed at me. My parents' newfound desire to be doting grandparents after their harsh rejection was too much to bear. Silently, I felt a need to share our story, perhaps to warn others or find solidarity in shared experiences of familial betrayal. One evening, with Alex asleep in the quiet hum of the computer before me, I began to write. The words flowed, fueled by pent-up frustration and a desire for transparency. I detailed everything, from the joy of discovering I was pregnant to the shocking moment my parents demanded rent and eventually kicked me out, and their sudden change of heart once Alex was born. I hit post on the blog, sharing it not only on my personal social media pages, but also tagging my parents' workplaces, where they had built reputations as kind and understanding individuals. It felt like a necessary addition, a way to show the contrast between their public personas and private actions. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Shares, likes, and comments piled up as strangers and acquaintances alike expressed their shock, support, and sometimes their own stories of similar betrayals. "You did the right thing, Emily. People need to see this side of them," read one comment, echoing the sentiment of many. However, not all feedback was supportive. Tagging my parents' workplaces brought a tidal wave of controversy. "You shouldn't have brought their jobs into this. That's too far." A family friend messaged me privately, a sentiment shared by others who felt I had crossed a line. The family drama intensified when my Aunt Laura called, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've embarrassed them in front of their colleagues. Was that really necessary? They're upset and considering legal steps against you." "I'm sorry for the tagging. That might have been a step too far," I replied. "But I'm not sorry for sharing my story. They needed to be held accountable." I replied, my voice firm yet weary from the emotional toll. Days later, amidst growing public scrutiny and conversations about the conditions of familial love, I edited the post to remove the tags to their workplaces, adding an apology for that specific action. However, I left the rest of the content untouched. My truth was not up for negotiation. As the post continued to circulate, it sparked discussions on various platforms about the expectations and obligations of family. Many rallied to my defense, echoing the sentiment that families should support, not condition their love on financial contributions. Through it all, I stood firm. The decision to go public was not made lightly, but it was made with the conviction that transparency and integrity mattered more than maintaining appearances. The controversy did lead to some relatives distancing themselves, but it also brought unexpected support from others who admired my courage. One afternoon, as I watched Alex play, his innocent laughter was a balm to my troubled heart. No matter the fallout, I knew my first duty was to him, to ensure he grew up in an environment where love was given freely, not conditionally. My resolve hardened, ready to face whatever consequences the future held, fortified by the belief that truth, however difficult, was always worth standing for. As the echoes of the social media storm began to fade, I redirected my energies toward the tangible elements of our new life. The chaos had taken its toll, and now more than ever, Alex and I needed stability and peace. I immersed myself in the world of freelance work, tapping into skills I had previously set aside. I hadn't used these skills in years, but the flexibility of freelance work was perfect for a single mother like me. It allowed me to balance caring for Alex while rebuilding our financial foundation. "Emily, I've got a project that might be right up your alley," said Mark, a former colleague who reached out after hearing about my situation. "It's remote and the pay is good. You should give it a shot." Grateful for the opportunity, I dove into the work with enthusiasm. Each completed assignment was more than just a task. It was a brick laid in the foundation of our new life. Slowly, the fruits of my labor began to show, and within months, I had saved enough to consider moving into a place we could finally call our own. Finding the right apartment was a journey in itself. Alex, ever curious, tagged along to viewings, his delighted giggles echoing through empty rooms that promised new beginnings. When we finally found the one, a small sunlit two-bedroom on the outskirts of town, I knew we had found our new home. "Look, Alex, this will be your room," I said, watching his eyes light up as we explored his new space. I could already picture where we put his little bed and the shelves for his growing collection of books. The day we moved in was a whirlwind of activity, with Sarah and a few other close friends lending their hands and hearts. "You've come so far, Emily," Sarah said as she unpacked a box of kitchenware. "I'm so proud of you." Their support was a reminder of the good in the world and of the kind of unconditional love my parents had withheld, but that Alex would never lack. Amidst these positive changes, my parents made sporadic attempts to reconnect, sending messages and small gifts for Alex. "We miss you. Let's try to start over," read a note from my mother, tucked into a book of children's stories. I approached these attempts with a guarded heart. Healing from their betrayal was not linear, and while I appreciated their efforts, I knew some wounds ran too deep for quick fixes. My responses were polite but firm, prioritizing our well-being and a stable, loving environment I was determined to nurture. "Mom, thanks for the book. We're doing well. Let's take things one step at a time," I replied, setting boundaries to protect Alex and me from potential hurt. As the months passed, our new apartment truly became a home, filled with laughter, love, and the occasional mess of toys and art supplies. I found joy in the small moments, morning cuddles, park outings, and bedtime stories that made up our days. It was a life built on our terms, free from the shadows of the past. Looking back, the road was undoubtedly rough, marked by heartbreak and hardship, but it led us here, to a place of our own, a sanctuary where Alex could thrive and where I could finally breathe, knowing we were safe, loved, and home. The new beginning we had fought so hard for was now our reality, and every day was a testament to the strength found in starting new. As months turned into a year, the unexpected consequences of my public revelation about my parents' conditional support began to unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. Despite my initial intentions to share my story as a cautionary tale and a source of catharsis, the ripple effects were profound, reshaping not just my life but theirs as well. My parents, who had always been respected in their professional circles, found their reputations challenged. The blog post had tarnished their reputations. The story of their harsh treatment during my pregnancy resonated deeply with many, and the community's response was swift and severe. Colleagues who had once greeted them with smiles now offered only cold shoulders. Invitations to social gatherings dried up as friends distanced themselves, disapproving of how they had treated their pregnant daughter. "It's just not the same at work anymore," my father confided during one of his rare calls, his voice tinged with regret. "People look at us differently. Actions have consequences," I replied, my tone neutral yet firm. It was important for them to understand the gravity of their decisions, not just for my sake, but for their own reflection and growth. As I forged ahead, building a life of independence and nurturing Alex with all the love I could muster, my parents were left to reckon with the fallout of their choices. The community's judgment served as a mirror, forcing them to confront the harshness of their actions. Meanwhile, Alex and I flourished in our new environment. Each day brought new joys and challenges, but the freedom to make our own choices and the absence of conditional love allowed us to thrive. My freelance career grew as I secured more clients, drawn in by my dedication and the quality of my work. Our little apartment felt like a castle, filled with laughter, love, and the endless potential of the days ahead. In quiet moments, I often reflected on the journey. The pain my parents had caused was still a tender wound, yet it had compelled me to grow in ways I never imagined. I had become not just a survivor, but a thriver, someone who could stand on her own and provide a nurturing home for her child. "Mom, look at me," Alex would shout as he zoomed around our living room, a makeshift cape tied around his neck. His joy was my greatest reward, a balm to the wounds of the past. As for my parents, their journey was their own to navigate. The community's backlash was a form of natural justice, a consequence of their actions that no court could have imposed. They reached out occasionally, their voices softer, tinged with the understanding of what they had lost. I listened, but with the knowledge that some distances were necessary for healing. In the end, fate had handed down its verdict. As I watched Alex grow each day, a testament to our resilience and love, I knew the future was bright, filled with the promise of unconditional love and new beginnings. Our past, with its shadows and pain, was behind us, serving not as a chain but as a lesson on the power of standing firm in one's truth and the redemptive strength of moving forward. The story of Emily's resilience has come to a close. How would you have handled the situation if you were in Emily's shoes? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life tales.
After my divorce from Albert was finalized, I started a new chapter in my life by moving in with my daughter Diana. About 8 months into this new life, something unexpected happened. On one of my days off, I was relaxing at home with Diana when I got a surprising phone call from my mother. She told me that Albert and his mother had suddenly shown up at my parents' house without being invited. Feeling worried and curious, I quickly got dressed and rushed over to my parents' house. When I arrived, I was surprised to find Albert and his mother sitting on the living room sofa, apparently waiting for me. Confused about why they were there, I asked, "Why are you here at my parents' house?" Albert's response shocked me. He demanded that I return the money I supposedly owed him. Let me introduce myself. I'm Judy, a 38-year-old office worker. I was married to Albert for 10 years, and we have a daughter, Diana, who is now in the 8th grade. We met on a blind date and connected instantly because of his warm, friendly, and cheerful nature. Our relationship grew from high school sweethearts to life partners, and he proposed after we had dated for a year. Our wedding was a joyful event, attended by my close group of high school friends. We were all deeply involved in each other's lives, celebrating major milestones together. Over time, each friend in our close-knit circle found their partner and got married, creating a tightly bound community of married couples. We were a happy family, and I always believed our home would be a place of love and support. As we grew older, our group of friends transitioned from carefree singles to married adults. Shortly after I announced my pregnancy, it seemed my friends did too. Soon we became a circle of mothers, sharing the joys and challenges of parenting together. It felt like we were all navigating life side by side, and I believed our bond would last forever. I loved being both a wife and a mother, and I was also passionate about my career. After graduating from college, I got a job in the planning and development department of a large company. My days were busy, and the work was demanding but fulfilling. Each day brought new lessons and challenges. One of my friends, who was a stay-at-home mom, once teased me, saying, "You're a workaholic, Judy, but you also manage to keep a wonderful family life. It's almost like you're living 2 lives." She admired my strength, though I often joked that I wished I had the endless energy of a strong man. Both Albert and Diana played important roles in helping me relax after long days at work. When I got home, Diana would greet me with a bright, "Oh, Mommy, welcome home." Her youthful enthusiasm and warm hugs melted away the day's stress. After Diana was born, Albert switched to part-time work at a local cafe, allowing him to take care of her, pick her up from school, and prepare dinner. This arrangement not only supported my career but also ensured that I came home to a freshly cooked meal, which was a huge relief. Albert's thoughtful cooking helped me unwind and feel refreshed. Evenings at home were a cherished time. Diana and I would often take baths together, chatting about our days and sharing little stories. This simple, everyday interaction brought me immense joy and fulfillment. My life was a beautiful balance of professional success and home life happiness, all made possible by the unwavering support and kindness of Albert and Diana. Their support not only boosted my energy but also deepened my dedication and passion for my work. Together we had created a life that was both rewarding and busy, proving that with the right support, you can have it all. As my career progressed, I began to achieve significant success. I was rewarded with a promotion, which brought more responsibilities. This meant working overtime and often coming home late. By this time, Diana had grown older and understood the demands of my job better, so she was able to manage more on her own. Meanwhile, Albert also increased his hours at the cafe, becoming more involved in the world of coffee. Recently, I started exploring different coffee shops, enjoying their unique beans. Today, I even brought home some coffee beans and cakes from a new bakery I found. I suggested we enjoy them together with some coffee, excited to share this with Albert, who had become passionate about roasting and experimenting with different types of beans at his job. This made the coffee he brewed at home exceptionally good. Albert and Diana were both very supportive of my dedication to my career, but despite their understanding, I began to notice a growing distance within our family. The first sign that something was wrong came when Diana approached me with a concern. "What's up? You wanted to talk about something?" I asked her. "The other day, when I went to see a movie with friends, I saw Dad with another woman," she said, her voice uncertain. I was shocked by her words. Diana continued, "They weren't holding hands or anything, but they seemed quite close. Lately, I've noticed Dad talking a lot on the phone before you get home. Sometimes he's so engrossed that he doesn't listen to me. He looks happy while he's on the phone. At first, I thought he was texting or talking to you. But after seeing him with that woman, I'm starting to wonder if he was talking to her instead." Diana's expression was filled with sadness. Being in middle school, she was very aware and sensitive to such things, and it was clear she was troubled by what she saw. I was equally stunned. The thought that Albert, who I always believed put Diana first, might be involved with someone else was heartbreaking. This revelation required a careful and sensitive approach, as our family's unity was at stake. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I didn't realize we were making you feel this way. I've been too focused on work, haven't I?" I said, feeling guilty as I looked at Diana. "No, it's okay that you work hard, Mom. Don't feel bad about that," Diana reassured me, her maturity in that moment beyond her years. I was touched by her understanding and compassion. "Thank you, Diana," I replied, my heart heavy. "I'll talk to your dad about this. If it turns out he's having an affair, I think I'll have to consider a divorce. Is that okay with you?" She nodded solemnly. "I don't like the idea of Dad having an affair. Just knowing that and still being with him would make me feel bad." Seeing Diana so distressed made me realize just how much I had overlooked our family's needs. Determined to address this issue, especially since Diana had bravely brought it up, I decided to hire a private investigator to look into Albert's activities. The findings were as shocking as they were conclusive. Albert was indeed having an affair, just as Diana suspected, and there was photographic evidence to prove it. What stunned me most was the identity of his affair partner, Tiffany, one of my high school classmates and a fellow member of our mom's group. I was more hurt by the betrayal of my trusted friend, Tiffany, than by Albert's infidelity. Tiffany, a stay-at-home mom and supposedly a loyal friend, was involved with Albert, neglecting her family commitments. When I saw the evidence, I was overwhelmed with emotion. Alone in my room, I was grateful that Diana hadn't walked in on me during this moment. The photos would have only added to her distress. I wasn't ready to confront Albert yet, and I couldn't let Diana see these disturbing images. I took a few deep breaths to calm myself. Shortly after, another friend from our mom's group mentioned she had changed jobs, which gave me an idea. I suggested we all get together, seeing it as the perfect chance to observe Tiffany without revealing that I knew about the affair. The gathering was set for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I quietly contacted a lawyer and began preparing for a potential divorce, readying myself for the challenges ahead. I gently informed Diana about what I had discovered and told her that her dad and I would likely be getting a divorce. Together, we spent our free time looking for a new apartment, trying to find a place that would represent a fresh start for us both. As the day of the gathering approached, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. When the day finally arrived, I engaged in casual conversation with my friends, starting by asking about one friend's new job. We all shared updates on our lives, and Tiffany seemed unaware that I knew her secret. During the conversation, she complained about her routine life, saying, "I'm just a housewife stuck in the same routine, unlike all of you who have careers." "You don't have to work because your husband supports you," another friend pointed out. "I do appreciate my husband," Tiffany replied, "but sometimes I feel a little bored." At that moment, I decided to address the elephant in the room. "So is that why you're having an affair with other people's husbands?" I asked, turning directly to Tiffany. The room fell silent, and the casual atmosphere quickly shifted to tension. "Judy, what do you mean by that?" Tiffany stammered, her face turning pale. "It seems that Tiffany is having an affair with my husband, Albert," I said plainly. "What? No way, you must be joking," another friend interjected, trying to defend Tiffany. Tiffany tried to deflect. "That's right, Judy. What are you talking about all of a sudden? You must have confused me with someone else." "Oh, really?" I countered, my voice steady. "Then why don't you all take a look at this?" I reached into my bag, pulled out the photos, and spread them out on the table for everyone to see. The room erupted into gasps of disbelief. "Oh my gosh!" they exclaimed, turning to Tiffany for explanations. Tiffany, clearly caught off guard and unable to deny the evidence in front of her, covered her mouth with her hand. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I happened to walk into the cafe where your husband works. I didn't know he worked there at first, but then I started going there regularly. My husband provides for me, but he's been neglecting me since we got married. I was feeling lonely," Tiffany continued, tears forming in her eyes. Despite her emotional response and attempts to explain her actions, the betrayal cut deep. An affair, especially with a friend's husband, was a breach of trust that was hard to forgive. Her reasons might explain her actions, but they didn't excuse them. The revelation was painful but necessary, confirming the reality I had begun to suspect and reshaping the dynamics of our friendships and personal lives. Throughout the confrontation, I maintained my composure, unaffected by Tiffany's tears. "I'm sorry to everyone else here, but Tiffany, I need to let you know that I will be seeking alimony from you," I announced firmly. "I also took a formal step earlier today. I sent a certified letter to your mailbox. Your husband should have already seen it." Tiffany's face fell as she absorbed the seriousness of the situation. "Oh no," she murmured, a mix of worry and disbelief in her voice. "How could he do something so terrible?" she asked, still reeling from the shock. "It's far worse to have an affair with a friend's husband, especially when you're married and have a child," I replied, steady and resolute. "You need to face the consequences and make amends for your actions." Visibly shaken, Tiffany nodded in acknowledgement. One of my friends chimed in, "We really can't trust you anymore, Tiffany." With that, we left the restaurant, leaving Tiffany to deal with the fallout. Once I had dealt with Tiffany, it was time to confront Albert. I was certain Tiffany had already informed Albert about what had happened. When I arrived home, Albert was waiting at the door, panicked. "What have you done?" "I just got a call from Tiffany." "Are you making our affair public? How could you be so terrible?" he demanded. "You acted like a good husband, but you were cheating on me. And it's not just about Tiffany. How could you do that to her family?" I retorted. "It's ridiculous. It seems people who have affairs think that as long as the other person doesn't find out, it's not a big deal. But what you did was wrong, and it all needs to be revealed as part of your punishment. That's why I'm going to divorce you and seek alimony and child support." Faced with clear evidence of the affair, Albert couldn't deny the truth. He agreed to the divorce, though he was hesitant about the financial implications. However, after I hired a strong lawyer and made it clear I was ready to take the case to court, he finally consented to the financial arrangements. Following the divorce, Albert sold the house we had lived in and moved to a new apartment. I pursued and received alimony from both Albert and Tiffany, totaling $50,000 from each, and I also secured child support from Albert. Once everything was settled, Diana and I began our new life together. Though the ordeal was traumatic, it marked the start of a new chapter where we could seek peace and rebuild our lives. Over time, the emotional wounds from my divorce began to heal. However, about 8 months later, I faced a new challenge. One day, while enjoying a relaxed day at home with Diana, my peace was disrupted by an urgent call from my mother. She informed me that my ex-husband Albert and his mother had unexpectedly shown up at my parents' house and forced their way inside without permission. My father wasn't home at the time, so my concerned mother quickly called me. I hurriedly prepared myself and went over to my parents' house. Upon arriving, I found Albert and his mother sitting nonchalantly on the living room sofa as if they belonged there. Confused and alarmed, I asked, "What are you both doing here at my parents' house all of a sudden?" Albert's response was shocking. He demanded, "I want you to give me back the money you owe me." "Huh? I never borrowed any money from you," I replied, perplexed. He retorted, "I paid $25,000 for our wedding, remember? You were in charge of the wedding, so that money was lent to you. Now that we're divorced, you're claiming it was all a fraud. Honestly, I could sue you for marriage fraud, but for now, all I want is that $25,000 back as a settlement." This unreasonable request took me aback. His mother also chimed in, insisting that I pay him as soon as possible. It became clear that Albert was struggling financially, which might have been driving his irrational demands. He had taken a full-time job at the cafe where he used to work part-time, but the pay was modest. Firmly, I reminded him, "We were both equally involved in the wedding, and I paid more of our living expenses than you did. The $25,000 is just a small part of what I contributed. Don't bother me with such unreasonable demands." As the tension escalated, they refused to leave. Just then, my father arrived, having been alerted by my mother. "What are you guys doing here?" he demanded sternly. Albert repeated his claims to my father, who, although usually calm, was visibly furious and shocked by Albert's audacious demands. "It's your fault for having an affair in the first place. If you're going to make such outrageous demands, get out of here," my father asserted, trying to expel them from the house. In a desperate turn, Albert fell to his knees and begged, "Please, Judy, lend me money. Not only are you demanding alimony, but Tiffany's husband is also after me, and I can't afford it. Even $6,000 would help." It was disheartening to see him in such a state, begging for money. However, I responded firmly, "No, I can't do that. Go home." The situation highlighted the deep desperation Albert was experiencing, but it also reaffirmed my resolve to maintain boundaries and protect my family's peace. As the situation with my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law escalated, my father intervened, suggesting he'd handle it. "Fine, I'll get the money. Just wait here," he said calmly and walked to another room. Curious, I followed him. With a mischievous grin, he said, "Well, I have plenty of money. Since we have it, why not give it to them?" He opened the closet and pulled out some cash, creating a sense of suspense. "I wonder how this will play out," I mused silently. My father then put the bills into an envelope and handed it to Albert. With faces lit up with satisfaction, my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law left with the envelope, thinking their plan had worked. As soon as they stepped out, I locked the door behind them and made a quick call to the police. It didn't take long for Albert and his mother to realize the money was fake. They rushed back, pounding on our door in anger. "Hey, what's going on? This is Monopoly money. I don't want this fake cash," Albert shouted, his voice thick with fury. I couldn't help but laugh as I responded through the door. "Since we have so much of it, I thought I'd share it with you." Albert's frustration peaked, and he began banging even harder, now kicking the door with his feet. Their actions only escalated the situation further. As Albert and his mother wreaked havoc on our door, the police arrived and caught them in the act. The scene drew the attention of the neighbors, many of whom witnessed their arrest. In the end, not only did Albert not get any money, but he was also fined for the disturbance and had to cover the damage to our front door. Ironically, one of the bystanders was a regular at the cafe where Albert worked, and word of his antics spread quickly. As a result, Albert lost his job and struggled to find new work. He had to move back in with his parents, and his in-laws ended up covering his alimony and child support payments. To safeguard my family further, I filed a restraining order against my former in-laws, ensuring that any future incidents would lead to an immediate police response. Now life is more peaceful and fulfilling. I'm devoted to working hard and relishing the time watching my daughter, Diana, grow up. Hi, my name is Alexis, and I'm 29 years old. I split my work between home and the office. My husband, Bruce, who's also 29, really loves his mom, Doris, but Doris often treats me badly. Even with these challenges, Bruce and I recently celebrated our second wedding anniversary, and I'm proud of how we've managed our relationship. Work has become a safe place for me, giving me a break and leading to several promotions, which isn't common for women in my field. Right now, I'm on a business trip in Europe, attending important meetings. During one meeting, my phone, which was on silent, started vibrating a lot. It was unusual, so I thought it might be an emergency, especially after seeing 5 missed calls from Doris. Worried, I stepped out to call her back. Just as I was about to, she called again. "Hello, Alexis, where are you?" she asked, sounding annoyed. I didn't like her tone, but I answered anyway. "Hi, Doris. How are you? Is everything okay? Where are you?" she repeated, clearly impatient. Even though she was being irritating, I was in the middle of something important and didn't want to argue. "I'm sorry, Doris, didn't Bruce tell you? I'm in a meeting on a business trip. Can we talk later?" I said gently. "Bruce mentioned it, but what are you doing leaving your house and husband alone? Come back home immediately," she demanded. As usual, her demands were sudden and unreasonable. "I'm sorry, Doris, but I'm busy with something crucial and can't leave," I started to explain, but she cut me off. "You're so controlling, even though you're just Bruce's wife. I don't care about your excuses. Come home right now." Her words were harsh, but I had to stay calm for the sake of my job. Today was turning out to be more important than I expected. "Do you realize what today is?" I asked, confused. Doris, with a slight smirk, revealed, "We're celebrating my 62nd birthday today." Her tone was a mix of triumph and expectation. This surprised me because I thought her birthday was later in the month. It was even more surprising since I was on a business trip. My husband and I had planned a special dinner at a fancy restaurant to celebrate her milestone birthday later on. I was getting tired of Doris's constant attempts to control things, which seemed to get worse every year, especially when she knew I was busy with important work. "As I mentioned, I'm currently away on business, so I won't be able to make it back home," I explained calmly. "That's amusing," she replied sarcastically. "I spoke to Bruce earlier, and he's taken the day off for me. All the relatives will be there, but you, Alexis, are always buried in work. You seem so detached. How do you think that makes your husband's family feel?" Her words were meant to hurt, and I knew if I kept talking, her sarcasm would only get worse. Since I was still in an important meeting, I had no choice but to end the conversation. "I'm sorry, but I can't attend your 62nd birthday celebration," I said. Doris's tone suddenly changed. She took a deep breath, clearly frustrated. "Fine then, I won't consider you part of the family anymore. Don't bother coming back. It's like a divorce. Bruce deserves better," she declared, her words sharp and painful. Her harsh remarks left me both angry and upset, but I refused to argue over the phone. "All right, we'll discuss this when I get back." "I'm sorry, but I need to go now," I replied. Doris snapped back. "What's with that attitude? I told you not to come back. I'll just talk to Bruce myself," and then she hung up. Drained from the interaction with my mother-in-law, I returned to my meeting, taking a deep breath after 3 more days of back-to-back meetings. I finally headed home, feeling angry and frustrated the entire way because of the fight with Doris. I barely remember the drive. When I opened the front door and called out, I heard my husband, Bruce, say, "Welcome back," in a tired voice. I took off my heels and walked into the living room, leaving my luggage by the entrance. There, surrounded by cardboard boxes, was Bruce, sweating as he sealed them with tape. "What's with all the boxes?" I asked, curious. Bruce explained that the boxes were packed with my things. He told me that during Doris's 62nd birthday celebration, the day she called me, she announced to everyone that I had ignored her birthday and been rude on the phone. She even told the relatives that she wanted me divorced and sent back to my parents' house because I wasn't a good match for her son. This was typical of my mother-in-law, so I asked Bruce for more details. "And then what happened? Did your mother tell you to get a divorce and you just agreed to it?" "No, I didn't exactly agree," Bruce replied, sounding exhausted. "But she insisted that I pack up your stuff." I felt cornered. What was I supposed to do? He stopped packing and looked defeated. "What do you mean you didn't argue with your mother? Does this mean you're okay with the idea of us getting a divorce?" I asked, feeling confused and frustrated. Bruce then shared that his father, Russell, had also sided with Doris, telling him, "If Doris is upset, it'll be hard on you. Best to just do what she says." So Bruce had reluctantly gone along with the idea of a divorce. I was shocked at how easily Bruce seemed to accept his mother's decision. "What is wrong with your family?" I wondered aloud. "Your father is controlled by your mother, and you just blindly follow her too." It felt like no one was on my side. Finally, Bruce said, "What my mother decides is final. It's only until she calms down and things settle. This divorce isn't real. I'll come for you when things are better," he added, looking at me with pleading eyes. I wished he would direct that pleading toward his mother instead. How could a grown man like Bruce be so afraid of his mother? I thought, feeling a mix of disappointment and disbelief. It seemed like there was no saving this situation. I almost felt ashamed, wondering what I had ever seen in him. As I thought about everything, I realized that maybe this was an unexpected chance for freedom. Staying with Bruce meant constantly dealing with Doris's hostility and her endless talk about divorce. Maybe separating was actually a blessing in disguise. I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself, and living alone wouldn't be a problem. With this new clarity, I faced Bruce and said firmly, "Let's go ahead with the divorce." Afterward, I called Doris. It took several tries, but she finally answered. "Hello," Doris said. I responded softly, "As you wish, we're getting a divorce." Doris's voice was unnaturally cheerful as she replied, "Yes, please leave. Finally, you realize you're not good enough for Bruce. I'm so relieved. Don't worry, I'll find him a new wife who is obedient, pretty, and nice to her in-laws." Her words were full of a misplaced sense of victory as she added, "I'm sure Bruce will be just fine. I'll take care of him until he finds his next wife, so you don't need to worry about that," Doris said, dripping with sarcasm. After hearing enough of her attitude, I told her, "Well, don't misunderstand. It's not just about you." Still feeling good about herself, Doris snapped back, "Oh, you're just a sore loser. Don't worry about me or Bruce, Alexis. I've got the divorce papers from the city office and gave them to Bruce. Don't forget to sign them." Then, without another word, she hung up. Bruce, who had overheard my conversation, looked strangely relieved, which made me wonder if he really understood what was happening. "By the way, does your mother know you're actually a full-time house husband?" I asked. "How could I tell her that?" he replied, his tone becoming serious. "My mother is obsessed with the idea that I'm a high-ranking employee at a big company, right?" I nodded, thinking about his behavior. I realized that Bruce had never been honest with Doris. At home, he wore old sweatshirts, but whenever he had to meet her, he'd put on a suit and pretend to be at work whenever she called. Doris had proudly announced at her birthday party that Bruce was such a devoted son, taking time off just to be there. She also bragged about his supposed status, claiming he could easily find a more obedient and attractive wife than me. This facade, kept up for appearances, was part of the strange dynamics that had brought our relationship to this point. The truth would likely come out once our divorce was finalized, but Doris, who thought so highly of her son, would probably never expect that Bruce was no longer working at the prestigious company he used to be at. In fact, Bruce had left his job about a year ago. What Doris saw as her elite, high-status son was now an unemployed, full-time house husband. Bruce's departure from his job came after a big mistake that led to a demotion, a pay cut, and a formal apology. He likely kept this hidden from his mother, fearing her reaction. The setback had a huge impact on him, especially given Doris's tendency to coddle him. The mere thought of returning to an office environment and facing the consequences of his mistake made him extremely anxious and sick. At first, he tried to manage by reporting his absences and requesting paid leave, but eventually, he stopped calling in altogether. As his unauthorized absences piled up, he was fired. Now, without any plans to find a new job, Bruce relied heavily on my income. He hadn't told Doris any of this, knowing she would be furious and disappointed. I felt a bit of regret knowing I wouldn't get to see Doris's reaction when she found out about her son's situation after I left. I imagined she would be utterly shocked, maybe even extremely upset, but that was no longer my concern. When Bruce handed me the divorce papers, he mentioned they were just a way to calm his mother down. Okay, I said, taking in the information. I quickly filed the papers and signed a lease for a new apartment, moving out as soon as I could. A month later, to my surprise, Doris called. Even though I thought I had cut ties for good, curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "What do you want now? Aren't you happy to be rid of me?" I asked, with a hint of sarcasm in my voice. "You're still the same. Just listen to me," Doris replied, her tone unchanged. She started talking about Bruce. She revealed that since I had left, she had visited Bruce's apartment multiple times to help with chores, only to find him lounging around in his room each time, with no signs of going to work or being sick. Suppressing a laugh, I replied casually, "Well, Bruce is like that because he has no intention of working again." Doris, seemingly unaware of her role in the situation, shockingly asked, "Alexis, can you do something about it?" "Why should I? You didn't want me in your family and wanted nothing to do with me," I retorted. It was so typical of her to ask for help only when it suited her, after treating me badly for so long. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I realized just how much of a mess she had made for herself. Doris then questioned me, trying to shift the blame onto me. "I was wondering if you said something to Bruce before you left." It was astonishing how she was trying to make me the bad guy, ignoring the real issues with her son. "Really, Doris?" I replied, incredulous at her insinuation. "You think I married Bruce just for a luxurious life? Why would the divorce hurt if that were true?" She looked at me suspiciously, as if she believed I had married Bruce just for his wealth. "Are you kidding me?" I thought to myself, amazed at how delusional she was. "I was the one supporting Bruce financially throughout our marriage. It was me providing for him," I continued, feeling frustrated. Because of Bruce, I couldn't even afford to live extravagantly. Should I consider asking for alimony? Doris was shocked by my statement. "How dare you make up something like that, Alexis? You just forgot to ask for alimony, didn't you? Bruce has a higher income and position than you. Don't be so unreasonable. If you want money, Bruce can pay whatever you want. After all, he's a high-level employee at a major company," she retorted, sticking to her false belief. Perhaps Bruce hadn't told her the truth. I didn't want to seem like I was gossiping, but I saw an opportunity to set the record straight. "Your proud son is a full-time house husband. He quit his job a long time ago," I revealed. "You're lying," Doris shouted, her voice so loud it hurt my ears. I pulled the phone away and suggested, "Why don't you check with his company? You'll find out who's telling the truth." There was a long silence. Then, with a much softer tone, Doris stammered, "Well, what if that's true? How are we going to manage? I can't support my son on just my pension, and no one will want to marry him if he's unemployed. What are we going to do?" I couldn't help but grin at her sudden change of heart. "What shall we do?" I echoed her words, amused. After a pause, she mumbled something to someone beside her. Then, in a completely altered tone, she pleaded, "Hey, Alexis, will you please come back home?" Her sudden shift puzzled me, but I replied firmly, "No, we're already divorced. I wouldn't come back to your family if heaven and earth turned upside down." The finality in my voice marked the end of that chapter as I moved on from the complicated ties that had bound me. As I was speaking to Doris, a commotion erupted in the background. Someone was shouting. It sounded like Bruce. His voice cut through. "I told you I'd come for you when things settled down." Doris quickly responded, "Yes, you could remarry my son if you wanted." "What are you talking about?" I asked, baffled and firm. "No way, I wouldn't do it for the world. Don't joke about this." "Thanks, but seriously, no." I made it clear to Doris that I had no interest in rekindling anything with her son or getting involved in any more toxic dynamics. I was done with someone who was overly devoted to his mother. "I did what you asked, so please stop changing your mind," Doris retorted, but the tension was obvious even through the phone. "There's a bit of verbal sparring here. It's not like you should take my words so seriously. You've been quite dismissive, haven't you?" she added. "I didn't think you'd go through with divorcing my son," she continued, her tone revealing her surprise at my firm rejection. In response to Doris' excuses, I said, "Well, I was just tolerating the situation. Besides, Bruce packed up my things and essentially kicked me out without my consent." I vented my frustration, listing everything she had done against me. "You see, that was just a prank," she claimed nonchalantly. "A prank? It's worse than that," I said, completely exasperated. There was nothing more to be said. Glancing at my watch, I noticed it was nearly 2:00 p.m. My lunch break had been wasted on this fruitless conversation. "Ah, Doris, are you done now?" I asked, eager to end the call. "What, Alexis? What did you say?" she replied, her voice suddenly sweet. Did Doris think that a sweet tone would soften my response? Knowing I wouldn't meet her expectations, I said firmly, "I'm going to hang up now. I have another meeting in a few minutes and need to review some documents." As I began to disconnect the call, Doris persisted. "Wait, Alexis." "Hey, Alexis, say something." I could hear her shouting as I hung up, leaving the chaos and the unwanted pleas behind me. I was ready to move forward, free from the turmoil that had entangled me for too long. During the chaos of our phone call, Doris also took the opportunity to berate Bruce, scolding him for mishandling the situation and pointing out the consequences of his actions. It became clear that Doris was quick to blame everyone else for her troubles. Completely drained by her behavior, I ended the call and decided to block her number for good. Afterward, Bruce tried repeatedly to reach me. Seeing a clear path forward, I consulted my lawyer to seek alimony. Faced with the prospect of legal action, Bruce's family, likely anxious about the consequences, agreed to settle the alimony in a lump sum payment. It seemed my former in-laws had to advance the money, which left Russell and Doris consistently agitated with Bruce. They urged him daily to find a job, which only added to his frustrations. Ultimately, Bruce moved back into his parents' house because he could no longer afford his apartment rent. He blamed his parents for his situation, which was now straining their finances, including their pension and retirement savings. Like mother, like son, they continued to blame each other for their problems and refused to reflect on their contributions to the mess. They were even considering applying for welfare, a move I hoped would make them realize that their selfish behavior couldn't continue indefinitely. On a brighter note for me, the business proposal I made during my trip was accepted, leading to a significant contract. This achievement resulted in another promotion, a higher salary, and a more affluent lifestyle. Now enjoying the freedom of a rich bachelor's existence, I was relieved to be free from the torment of in-laws and financial dependence on family members. Reflecting on the past, if I ever consider marriage again, I will undoubtedly conduct a thorough background check to avoid any mama's boys or troublesome in-laws.
Your son has a warrant out for his arrest. Hearing those words, my mind went completely blank. What? Why, my son is being arrested? What does this even mean? Questions began swirling in my head, one after another, but none stayed long enough to grasp. I stood frozen in the doorway, speechless, my mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The police officer stepped forward, clearly intending to prevent me from shutting the door. Overwhelmed by the presence of the three large men, I instinctively tried to close the door quickly, anxiety surging through me. Your son is here, isn't he? May we come in and talk for a bit? One of the officers asked. Just a moment, please, I stammered, desperately trying to stop them from entering. I braced against the officer's chest, using every ounce of strength in my legs to hold my ground. I'm sorry, I really don't understand what's happening. Could you please explain what's going on? I pleaded, my voice tinged with panic. The officer holding the warrant folded it up and sighed deeply before responding. It seems he ran away with some cash. The suspect was seen heading towards this house. Someone got a good look at his face, so denying it won't be easy, he said, a faintly triumphant look crossing his face. Theft, my son. While I felt my mind going blank, I forced myself to listen to the officer's words. Despite the color draining from my face, I firmly replied, my child would never do something like that. It's absolutely impossible. The officer, clearly tired, gave a dismissive reply, but I was certain. My son wouldn't do such a thing. After all, I was a 50-year-old housewife, living a peaceful life with my husband and son in the house we had built with years of savings. We all got along well, leading a happy life, right in the middle of bliss. But lately I had been feeling worn out. Things hadn't been going smoothly, and when I was alone, worries constantly plagued my mind. I need to get this done too, I would say aloud, busy without even realizing it. Well, maybe it's okay to leave it for later, I muttered to myself one day as I turned on the TV in the living room, trying to escape reality. It's better to take a break sometimes, I told myself, feeling physically exhausted. But even as I watched the daytime drama, the story didn't sink in, and my thoughts remained cloudy. Suddenly, my gaze drifted to the numerous certificates and trophies on the shelf, awards my son Oliver had received for his achievements in soccer. He was truly a son to be proud of. As these thoughts floated through my mind, the doorbell rang. Who could it be? Yes, I muttered, turning down the TV and getting up from the sofa. Maybe it was something from my mother-in-law. Sometimes she sent vegetables to our house without prior notice, saying she found detailed communication bothersome. Or perhaps it was the online order I had placed recently. My son had been using online shopping more frequently, and my husband had also gotten into it, so that was a possibility. Thinking these mundane thoughts, I went to the door without a second thought. If only I had checked the intercom camera, I might have been prepared for what awaited me, but unfortunately, I opened the door without a shred of suspicion. "Yes, I'll open it right away," I said. But the moment the door swung open, I was shocked by the sight before me. "Hello, is this the residence of the Smith family?" "Yes, it is, but you're police officers, aren't you? What can I do for you?" I asked, my voice quivering. There stood 3 officers, just like the ones I often saw on the dramas I watched casually. I was completely taken aback. Seeing police officers, even when I hadn't done anything wrong, made me nervous and tense, as if I had unknowingly caused some trouble somewhere. I gripped the doorknob tightly, my knuckles white, as one of the officers handed me a piece of paper. I couldn't make out what the officer was holding at first, so I squinted, trying to see it more clearly. Then in a cold voice, he spoke. "There's a warrant out for your son's arrest." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind went completely blank. What? Why? My son is going to be arrested. What does this mean? Has he done something wrong? Questions surged and vanished in my mind as I stood frozen in the doorway, speechless. The officers stepped forward, clearly not intending to let me close the door. Overwhelmed by the presence of the 3 imposing men, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I tried to close the door quickly, but the officers wouldn't allow it. They pressed their feet against the door, keeping it open. Fear gripped me. "Your son is here, isn't he? May we come in and talk for a bit? If you're not hiding anything, you wouldn't mind letting us in, right?" One of the officers asked, his tone implying suspicion. "Please wait a moment," I stammered, desperately trying to stop them from entering. I pushed against their chests, bracing my feet to keep them out. "Excuse me, I really don't understand what this is all about. Could you please explain what's going on?" I appealed, genuinely confused and frightened. "A warrant? For what exactly?" The officer holding the warrant folded it with a sigh. "Mom, there have been a series of thefts in this area recently. According to witnesses, the suspect looks a lot like your son." "What? The suspect looks like him?" I repeated, stunned. The officer continued, his voice tinged with triumph. "It seems he took off with cash and ran toward this house. People have seen his face clearly, so denying it will be difficult." "Theft? My son? No way." As my mind began to spin, I somehow managed to keep listening to the officer in front of me. He then pulled out another document, unfolded it, and started talking about something that seemed related to its contents. "It appears your son is involved in several theft cases. The total amount of the damage is around $500,000. However, considering his youth, the victims are willing to settle," he said. $500,000? No way, I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. My child couldn't have done such a thing. "It's absolutely impossible," I exclaimed in shock, but the officer, looking weary, replied, "I understand how you feel. Every parent says the same thing, thinking their child couldn't possibly be involved in theft. However, we need you to prepare the $500,000, and we'll discuss this further with your son." Staring at the officer's face, I reached for the front door, my mind racing. "Could you please wait outside for a moment?" I asked. "No, we'll wait inside," he responded firmly. "I need to use the bathroom. You can't just barge into someone's house without permission while the homeowner is in the bathroom, right? Or can't you wait for just 5 minutes while I go?" I blurted out, grasping at any excuse to buy time. I needed to calm down, and the imposing presence of the officers was overwhelming. More than anything, I wanted to close the door. "Please let me use the bathroom. I'm at my limit. I'll listen to everything properly afterward," I pleaded. The officer hesitated for a moment, which was all I needed. Quickly, I shut the front door. A loud thud followed. Probably the officer knocking or kicking it, but I didn't hesitate. I immediately locked the door. As soon as the lock clicked, a torrent of emotions washed over me: relief, fear, and a flood of questions. "Mom, please open the door." The officer's voice boomed, accompanied by the sound of pounding on the door. Worried about disturbing the neighbors, I slowly moved away from the entrance. "I'll be right back," I called out, rushing to the bathroom. I didn't really need to use it, but I needed a moment to think. Calm down, I muttered to myself, trying desperately to steady my nerves. Gradually, my thoughts began to organize themselves. As I sat on the toilet, my hands trembling as I grabbed some toilet paper, I reassured myself that it was impossible for Oliver to be involved in a crime. It had to be a misunderstanding. Determined, I decided I would face the officers with confidence. After all, I had nothing to hide. About 5 minutes later, after taking a deep breath, I resolved to return to the front door, unlocked it, and faced the officers again. "Excuse me, ma'am," the officer called out loudly, but I kept reminding myself to stay calm, no matter what. "Your son hasn't tried to escape in the meantime, has he? Please allow us to search the house," the officer insisted. "He hasn't done anything like that. I'll say it again. My son hasn't committed any theft." "It's impossible," I responded, my voice firm. "Even if you say that, we can't just take your word for it. There are witness testimonies and camera footage. If you cover for your son, you could also be implicated," the officer warned. "Camera? You didn't mention that before." I snapped, my suspicion growing. "We mentioned it because it seems you won't admit it." "There is evidence," the officer replied. "Earlier, you said he resembled the suspect, but now you're asserting it's my son. Your story keeps changing, doesn't it?" I questioned, feeling increasingly uneasy. "Look, ma'am, I understand it's hard to accept," the officer continued, relentlessly pressing on and ignoring my questions. His words lacked consistency, and something felt off. The information kept shifting, and it didn't add up. Upon closer inspection, even the police uniforms looked like costumes from a drama. I stared intently at the face of the youngest-looking officer, who quickly averted his gaze when he noticed my scrutiny. Clearly suspicious. "Ma'am, enough is enough. We're coming in," the oldest and largest officer declared, pushing past me. "Wait, you can't just barge in like that." I protested, trying to block the way, but he shoved me aside effortlessly. I stumbled, falling onto the floor as the officers pushed further into the house. "Stop. Don't come in," I shouted, scrambling to my feet to follow them. "Don't touch anything." Despite my desperate cries, the officers ignored me, rifling through drawers in the kitchen and living room. Rummaged through everything from one end of the room to the other, leaving a trail of chaos. My stomach churned with anxiety. "Stop it, I'm telling you." "Hey." I rushed to an officer who was opening a drawer containing mine and my husband's wedding rings and slammed it shut with a loud bang that echoed through the room. "There's nothing here. You can't just enter someone's home and go through their drawers." I glared at one of the officers, trembling with anger. It was the younger officer who had averted his gaze earlier. He nodded slightly at me before heading to another room. Eventually, the three officers zeroed in on Oliver's room, clearly identified by the nameplate on the door. Without hesitation, they entered. "My son is sleeping in there. Don't go in," I shouted with all my might, but my plea was ignored as the door swung open. "We just want to talk," one of the officers called out loudly as they entered, but they suddenly fell silent, all three of them staring toward the bed at the back of the room. "Hello. I've heard the conversation. I'm Oliver, the son," my son said, slowly bowing his head toward the officers from his bed. Spreading his arms and smiling, he continued, "As you can see, I'm in this condition right now, so there's no way I could commit theft." The officers, momentarily speechless, just stared at him. Oliver was lying in a nursing bed equipped with a pressure sore prevention mattress. Beside the bed stood a wheelchair, and nearby, Sacks of towels and a call button were within easy reach. My son was bedridden. "I'm sorry, it seems we've made a mistake," said one officer, who had previously spoken in an almost threatening tone, but now wore a rueful smile. Oliver returned the smile slightly. "That's right, I'm relieved. I can't move my lower body, so it's impossible for me to steal and run away," he explained, pointing at the wheelchair. "I can't even get into that without help. I can't go outside by myself." "I see. That was the case. We apologize for our mistake. We'll take our leave now," the officers said awkwardly, nodding their heads as they prepared to leave. Filled with anger, I clenched my fists, wanting to say something. But one officer lingered, approaching Oliver. "Hey," he said quietly. "What's up?" my son replied. "What happened to you? Your body?" the officer asked, his voice tinged with concern. "Steve. Is that you?" Oliver looked up at the officer, recognition and joy lighting up his eyes. I approached the youngest officer, suddenly realizing it was Steve, Oliver's childhood friend. "Steve?" I exclaimed in surprise, covering my mouth with my hand. Steve had been one of Oliver's closest friends since they were kids, sharing a deep passion for soccer. They played together nearly every day from elementary school onward, and had planned to join the middle school soccer club together. But then Steve had to move away suddenly due to his parents' work, and they lost touch. "I remember watching you excel at soccer, thinking you'd go pro after college. I even saw you in magazines. But what happened?" I asked, unable to hide my shock. Steve, looking visibly shaken, glanced down as Oliver lifted the blanket to reveal his legs, which were motionless. "I had an accident a month ago," Oliver said with a sad smile. "Now, my lower body doesn't move at all." Seeing the pained expression on Steve's face, Oliver quickly pulled the blanket back over his legs and turned a more genuine smile toward him. "But hey, it's really been a long time, hasn't it? You became a police officer, but don't you play soccer anymore?" Steve's expression grew complex, and he answered quietly, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't have the talent like you, Oliver. Besides, I had other things to worry about." I recalled Steve's difficult family situation. His father, who didn't have a steady job, went out drinking every night. The move wasn't just about his parents' work but also his father's debts. As Steve spoke, his head hung low. Oliver sat up halfway and began to speak encouragingly. "What do you mean you had no talent? You were always so hardworking. I was always envious of you, Oliver. You never gave up on anything, and you always looked so cool. I pushed myself because of you. And now, seeing you do your best as a police officer, it gives me strength too," Steve confessed, his voice trembling. "I'll do my best, I promise. Next time we meet, let's play soccer together, okay? Even if I'm in this situation, I can still play. There are ways for people with disabilities to play soccer, you know." But Steve didn't respond, keeping his head down, his complexion pale. "Hey, are you okay, Steve?" Oliver asked. Concern etched on his face. Suddenly, tears began to fall from Steve's eyes, silently dripping onto the floor. "Steve," Oliver called out again, his voice filled with worry. Steve struggled to hold back his sobs as he looked up at Oliver. In that tense moment, I noticed the other two officers quietly trying to slip away. "Where do you think you're going?" I shot them a sharp look, my anger flaring. The officers, caught off guard, exchanged flustered glances. It seems there was a mistake, and we need to conduct further investigations, so we'll be leaving now," one of them stammered, clearly trying to avoid any confrontation. They were attempting to leave without even a word of apology after tearing through our home. Just as I was about to shout at them, Steve spoke up, his voice strong despite the tears. "I'm out." The two officers turned to him in confusion. "What do you mean, out?" one of them demanded. "You were the one who said this house was wealthy," Steve continued, his voice shaking but resolute. "This is wrong, and you know it. I'll tell everything to the police." A heated argument erupted between the officers and Steve. One of them, driven by anger, lunged at Steve. "Wait." I tried to intervene, but fear held me back, and my voice barely registered. The officer's fist connected with a sickening thud, sending Steve staggering to the floor, his cheek swelling from the blow. Another officer kicked him while he was down. "Pay the money and clear your father's debt," one of the burly men demanded, his voice dripping with malice. I stood frozen, horror and shock gripping me as I watched their brutality. Despite the pain from the punches and kicks, Steve looked up at the officers and declared, "I'll turn myself in. I'm sorry, Oliver. I'm not the person you praised anymore. I've always envied you, your talent, your life, and I hate myself for using my circumstances as an excuse for the terrible things I've done." "Don't joke about turning yourself in," snarled one of the fake officers, raising his fist to strike Steve again. But before he could, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "Hold it right there." We'd all turned toward the source of the voice, and a wave of relief washed over me as I saw a real police officer in an official uniform, his badge gleaming. The fake officers were swiftly apprehended by the real police. "Sorry for the delay. Are you and your son hurt?" the real officer asked, concern in his voice. "No, we're okay. Somehow," I replied, still shaken. Earlier, while in the bathroom, I had secretly called the police, reporting that 3 men claiming to be officers were in my house. Their suspicious behavior had prompted me to contact the real authorities. "Come quietly," the real officer ordered as the imposters resisted arrest but were quickly subdued. Steve, who had been sitting on the floor, was helped up by one of the officers. He'd offered no resistance as he was led away. "Steve," Oliver called out. Steve stopped, turned back to us, and with deep regret in his eyes, he apologized before leaving with the officer. Oliver watched his friend's retreating figure until he was out of sight. After the house was cleared and many questions were answered that day, we began the process of cleaning up the mess the imposters had left behind. I waited anxiously for my husband's return. Despite his demanding job and the long commute, he hurried back as soon as he could, apologizing repeatedly for not being able to contact us sooner. I reassured him that we were safe, and that was all that mattered. Later, we learned more about what had happened with Steve. Steve was the only one of the 3 to confess to the police. It turned out that they were high school acquaintances who had become involved in a string of thefts in the area. Their scheme targeted wealthy families, falsely accusing their children of theft and extorting money from panicked parents. The fake arrest warrant was their own creation, and the police uniforms were nothing more than costumes. This tactic had worked for them, until this incident led to their arrest. Steve had initially worked hard to pay off his family's debts, but as the interest kept piling up and he couldn't keep up with the payments, he reluctantly agreed to participate in this scheme. He was told that if he provided information about the affluent area where he used to live, a portion of his debt would be reduced. That's why they knew so much about our town, and why their crimes had gone undetected for so long. In the end, all of them were arrested and held accountable for their actions. Their attempt to deceive people by impersonating police officers and entering homes without permission resulted in particularly severe penalties. When my son Oliver heard the news, he wasn't disturbed. Instead, he decided to turn himself in, believing in the goodness still within Steve. "I knew it. He's essentially a good guy," Oliver said, nodding and smiling as he listened to me. "It's surprising they weren't caught earlier, especially with those disguises." "Did you know from the start that they weren't real cops, Oliver?" "Yeah," Oliver replied, claiming to be a cop with such an untrained physique. "Steve used to be much fitter. I could tell something was off right away." He later shared that he had noticed other suspicious details, like how Steve wouldn't meet his eyes, and how his voice, though different, reminded him of his old friend. "I wonder how long it will be before he can come back," Oliver mused. "It's not confirmed yet, but don't worry. He'll bounce back. He's still the same guy he used to be, Oliver said with certainty. A month later, on a quiet morning, I brought breakfast to Oliver's room. "Good morning, Oliver," I greeted him. "Morning, Mom. Did it arrive today?" Oliver asked, his mind on something else before even thinking about breakfast. I nodded and handed him a simple envelope. "You're more concerned about Steve than breakfast, huh?" I teased gently. "Yes," Oliver admitted, carefully opening the letter from Steve. "What does Steve say?" "He wants to play soccer together. He's been staying active over there," Oliver shared, a smile spreading across his face as he read the letter. Seeing him so happy, I couldn't help but smile too. Beside Oliver was a new type of wheelchair designed specifically for playing soccer. After everything that had happened, Oliver had decided to start training in power chair soccer. His determination was extraordinary. He immediately set his sights on playing soccer with Steve again. Watching him, I made up my mind. Even if there were hardships ahead and things didn't always go smoothly, I would live my life to the fullest, inspired by my always smiling son who faced his challenges with such a positive attitude. Today, I felt like I could accomplish anything I set my mind to. Now that our son has moved out, you'll be returning to your family home. This house will be left empty and lonely, so we'll be moving in here instead. Don't worry, everything will be fine. My beloved husband passed away suddenly. After the funeral, my husband's parents came to me, overwhelmed with grief. This house, though filled with memories, few as they are, of the time I spent with my husband, is now a painful reminder of his absence. Why must I leave it so soon, without even a moment to wipe my tears? My mother-in-law told me coldly that I had no choice but to leave. My name is Hazel, and I work as a clerk at a real estate company. I met my husband Tom through my job. He was the brother of one of my colleagues, and since their workplaces were nearby, Tom often visited his brother. As a clerk, I was familiar with my colleague, who would eventually become my brother-in-law. Through him, I met Tom, and we began spending time together, being invited to lunch by the brothers, and so on. Tom was cheerful and kind, and we got along well, though I didn't see him as a romantic interest at the time. I thought he felt the same way. However, an unexpected event changed everything. We had planned to meet at a restaurant reserved by my colleague, but he couldn't make it due to sudden matters. Though it was disappointing, we decided not to cancel the reservation, so Tom and I ended up spending time alone for the first time. I later discovered that my brother-in-law had orchestrated this, intending for Tom and me to be alone together over a meal. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and we delved deeply into each other's lives, discovering how much we had in common. I was charmed by Tom's kind smile, and this day marked the beginning of a change in our relationship. It wasn't long before we got married, and I am deeply grateful to my brother-in-law for setting this in motion. Today was the first time I met my in-laws since our marriage. I was filled with anxiety, but my father-in-law and mother-in-law welcomed me warmly. Their friendly demeanor helped me relax. "Thank you for coming," my mother-in-law said, showing great care. "We've prepared a lot of food, hoping to make this a wonderful day." My in-laws, like my husband, had independent personalities and were approachable, which was a relief. They respected our decisions and never imposed their views on marriage or child rearing. We talked about possibly living closer to them, but my husband and I had plans to build our own home. I inherited a piece of land from my grandfather, who was very fond of me. The property, recently renovated and located in a prime area, had skyrocketed in value due to recent redevelopment. As someone in real estate, I knew selling the property would be more advantageous than living in it. Although the location was excellent, the distance to our workplaces made it impractical to stay there. We decided to sell both the land and the house to fund our dream home. However, a significant change occurred when my husband, who worked in sales, was transferred to a different branch of his company. The corporation, with many branches nationwide, deemed him the only suitable candidate for the job, leaving us with no option but to accept. Given my own work commitments, we decided that he would go on a solo assignment, promising to return during the holidays. He also mentioned that my parents would come to visit occasionally, advising me not to push myself too hard and suggesting I might go out with them sometimes. I don't mind going out. Your parents are nice people. However, it looks like selling the house will be delayed a bit, and my husband's solo assignment has begun. I felt a wave of loneliness and anxiety with the sudden change, but I had to push those feelings aside and look forward to reuniting with my husband as he had suggested. My in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, frequently visited on weekends. It seemed that my father-in-law used to be away on business trips, and my mother-in-law often shared her experiences of enduring loneliness while caring for her young sons. Even without children, she encouraged creating family memories, suggesting outings as a nice change of pace. "Let's go out together. Shopping might be a nice change," my mother-in-law would say. Thanks to her, I never felt completely alone, and my weekends became quite busy. However, I started to notice a pattern. Almost every weekend, she would suggest going out, and while the outings themselves were enjoyable, her insistence grew more forceful over time. After about a month, her invitations began to feel a bit pushy. She started disregarding whether I was tired or had household chores. When I mentioned wanting to rest, she looked at me as if I was being unreasonable. "It's fun to go out together, right? You don't dislike being with me, do you?" she would ask. "It's not that," I replied. "It's just that we go out every week, and I think you should rest too." She looked disappointed at my response, but when I reluctantly agreed, she would smile brightly, acting as if she had forgotten how persistent she had been. My concerns about her behavior grew. The places she insisted on taking me were always high-end, featuring expensive shopping and costly meals. Often she would leave the store first, making it seem like I was expected to cover the bill. She never thanked me for these payments, nor did she offer to contribute later. While my husband and I were financially comfortable, having both been committed to saving, I found my mother-in-law's extravagance unsettling. This issue persisted even when my father-in-law was present, and his presence only seemed to increase my financial burden. Discussing the issue with my husband was challenging. He had promised to come home during the holidays, but his work was extremely demanding, and he rarely had the chance to return. During a video call, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes and his haggard appearance, indicating his exhaustion. I'd understood that discussing this issue with my in-laws would only add to the stress. So I put on a brave face and said, "Your mother has been really good to me. You take care of yourself, Tom." "I'm fine, so don't worry." Despite my reassurances, I continued to cover expenses related to my in-laws, unable to refuse their requests. Their behavior escalated, and one day, when I said I couldn't go out, they asked, "Could we borrow a little money? Just a small amount. We've already made a restaurant reservation and we'll take another friend instead of you, so could you lend us the shortfall?" I really didn't want to lend them money, but refusing would only complicate matters further. Reluctantly, I agreed. I reluctantly accepted my mother-in-law's request and withdrew the money from my wallet. Even then, I didn't discuss this situation with my husband. When I mentioned to my mother-in-law that I might bring it up with Tom, she responded that it would be embarrassing to talk to him about it. I was stunned. It seemed she was trying to take advantage of her son's wife rather than addressing her eldest son directly. I stopped expecting anything from my mother-in-law. Her requests for money became routine, disguised as pocket money, and I complied to avoid further pressure. I knew the problem was escalating, but found it difficult to address with her directly. Her behavior became increasingly bewildering and intrusive. She would suddenly visit our home without notice and inspect the interior closely, as if invading my privacy was her right. "This piece of furniture, a relic from Hazel's grandfather, it's lovely. You have such high-quality items here," she would say, admiring everything as if it were her own. Some of our furniture had been cherished by my grandfather, and my mother-in-law seemed fascinated by it, visiting frequently just to gaze at it. I began to seriously consider discussing her behavior with my husband. Although he might be surprised, it would be a relief to find a solution together. Her actions were intolerable, and although she was my mother-in-law, invading my privacy was unacceptable. I'd resolved to talk to my husband, but I also knew I had to wait until his assignment away from home ended. Hoped that his return would put an end to my mother-in-law's demands for money. With a faint hope, I persevered, looking forward to reuniting with him. Then an unexpected situation arose. Tom collapsed and was rushed to the hospital due to a sudden heart attack, likely from overwork. I was in shock when I received the call from his workplace. I rushed to the hospital, but despite the ambulance's speed, it was too late. The man who had always been the picture of health had passed away. I couldn't grasp the reality of it and was in a daze throughout the funeral. To be honest, I hardly remember anything from that time due to the overwhelming sense of loss. My brother-in-law came to assist, taking on many of the duties I would normally have handled. "You've just lost your brother too. I'm sorry for making you help so much," I said. "It's my brother's funeral. Of course I should help," he replied. "By the way, how are things with the land? Is the house ready?" After the funeral, my brother-in-law and I discussed the situation regarding the land and house. While tidying up, I reluctantly agreed to a proposal from my brother-in-law, assuring him it was fine. A few days after my husband's funeral, my in-laws arrived at our house, but it was immediately clear they were not here to offer condolences. "It's unfortunate that our son passed away so suddenly, but don't worry, we're here for you," my mother-in-law said with an unnervingly forced smile. To my shock, she had brought a truck filled with furniture and belongings from their family home. I was speechless, confused, and taken aback. It was obvious they were preparing to move in without any prior discussion. Their motives were clear. "You're after this land, aren't you?" I asked, my voice icy. My mother-in-law, with a cold smile, responded, "The value of this land has increased significantly. I've always had my eye on this house. It's thanks to this place that you could marry my son. I agreed to the marriage because you inherited this land." My heart sank as I struggled to process her words. "Are you saying you and father-in-law will be moving in with me?" I asked, bewildered. "Of course not. Don't be ridiculous," she snapped sharply, revealing her true intention to take over the house regardless of Tom's death. It became clear that they were planning to kick me out and claim the land for themselves, assuming I would vacate the house now that my husband was gone. "Now that your son is gone, you'll go back to your hometown, right? It would be sad to leave the house empty, so we'll live here instead," my mother-in-law said with a smile that only deepened my anxiety. I felt a surge of terror as I corrected her. "This house has already been sold," I said, struggling not to laugh at her misunderstanding. My mother-in-law's expression shifted to shock, and she stood there dumbfounded. At that moment, a truck from another moving company arrived. "Excuse us, we're here to help you move," the new movers said, confirming their presence after spotting the truck from the other company. The crew arranged by my mother-in-law also emerged from their vehicle, but their work had yet to begin. Seeing the other movers' arrival seemed to alert them that something was amiss. I asked my in-laws to explain their actions, but they were too flustered to respond clearly. Realizing that arguing wouldn't help, I instructed the movers arranged by my in-laws to move their truck away. I then bluntly told my in-laws, "This house has already been sold to someone else and they're scheduled to move in. We can't let you bring your belongings into someone else's home." To the surprise of both my in-laws and the movers, a luxury car pulled up and a wealthy-looking family stepped out. They were the new owners of the house and land, which were no longer mine. My in-laws were further confused and couldn't comprehend the situation. "Please move your truck quickly," I said firmly. "We need to clear the space for our new residents." As the truck from my in-laws' side moved away, the new movers began moving in the furniture. Unable to accept the situation, my in-laws confronted me aggressively. The new male homeowner, ensuring his family's safety, left them in the car and rushed over to us. adding to the commotion. "What's going on here? We bought this house. Why is there another moving truck? Please leave immediately," he demanded. I had no choice but to apologize profusely for the confusion caused by my in-laws' unexpected visit. However, they refused to leave and forcibly entered the house. The interior had changed significantly from what they remembered. None of the furniture they were familiar with was present. Seeing this, my mother-in-law panicked and started to create a scene. "What is this? The house is empty. There are no antiques, no lights. Those were my favorites. What's going on?" she cried out, unable to grasp the situation. Despite the new homeowner threatening to call the police, she remained stunned. My father-in-law seemed to snap out of his daze when he heard the man's voice. He quickly went over to my mother-in-law and dragged her out of the house. She calmed down a bit once she was away from the property. I apologized again to the new homeowner, who warned that there might be further trouble. At his request, I provided him with my in-laws' names and addresses to help resolve the situation. Exhausted but resolute, I went back to my in-laws to explain what had happened. I clarified that we had already completed the move a few days before my husband passed away, and that we had always planned to sell the house and the land. The sale had gone through as planned, despite a temporary delay due to my husband's solo work assignment. My brother-in-law had played a significant role in managing this. I had been overwhelmed by the demands for money from my in-laws and had kept it to myself to avoid adding to my husband's worries. This led to a deep sense of depression. During this time, my brother-in-law, who has always had a strained relationship with my in-laws, was my support. He'd assured me he would help and keep everything confidential. When he heard my story, he was furious with my in-laws. As an employee of a real estate company and my husband's brother, he was well aware of their plans. He had considered Tom his only family, but saw me as family as well. He suspected that my in-laws either intended to move into the house themselves or force us out to take over. According to him, my in-laws were naive, pretentious, boastful, and unscrupulous, especially my mother-in-law. Despite presenting a gracious facade in public, my mother-in-law was actually self-centered, cunning, and malicious. My brother-in-law's insights into my in-laws were shocking. My husband, the eldest son, was unaware of their true nature, likely because they always maintained a polished front. My brother-in-law suggested that we sell the land before my in-laws could take it from us. I agreed and began making the necessary arrangements. Although the house and land were important heirlooms from my grandfather, I didn't want to keep them if they were going to cause issues in my marriage. I didn't want to involve such cherished property in any further disputes. I had discussed this thoroughly with my husband, and when he learned of my in-laws' actions, he expressed regret for not realizing their true nature sooner. "I'm sorry I didn't see this before," he said. "If you think it's best to sell, let's do it before my parents can interfere. I'm truly sorry about letting go of Grandpa's house. I think Grandpa would have preferred us to move on rather than let it cause us problems." With that decision made, the first step was to find a new home and move without alerting my in-laws to our plans. Thanks to my brother-in-law's expertise in real estate, we quickly found a buyer for the house. We set a reasonable price considering the slight wear from our time there. The new owners, the family who had just arrived, signed the contract promptly. Originally, I had planned to wait for Tom to return to our new home, but now that he was gone, this was my only regret. As the movers began bringing in the new furniture, my in-laws could only watch in disbelief. The movers they had hired, angry and confused, demanded an explanation for the situation. They confronted my in-laws, who were too distraught to provide a coherent answer. After some trouble, the movers decided to leave for the day, but warned that additional fees would be incurred due to the unexpected circumstances. Realizing the truth, my mother-in-law, trembling and distraught, grasped at my clothes. "This is the house of my eldest son's wife. This is where we should live, right?" She tried to justify herself, but I ignored her and left with my belongings. The land now belonged to a new family, and I had no rights to it. The memorial service for my husband went smoothly, though my in-laws were present but left without addressing the house. Our interactions dwindled and I found peace in my new life, even though I faced the sorrow of Tom's loss. Though I had savings from the sale of the house, Tom was no longer with me, and our plans for a new house had vanished. I tried to move forward, cherishing Tom's memory and returning to work. Meanwhile, my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, seemed increasingly dissatisfied. I hadn't informed them of my new address, not wanting any further contact, which frustrated them greatly. Unable to visit their distant second son and not knowing my address, my mother-in-law's frustration grew. One night, she scattered gasoline around the house we had sold. Fortunately, a passerby noticed her suspicious behavior, and she was quickly restrained before any serious damage occurred. The police were alerted and she was arrested for attempted arson after a lighter was found in her possession. The new homeowner, furious to discover that she was the same woman who had previously intruded, was understandably distressed. When I received a call about a lawsuit from the homeowner, I apologized profusely for the fear and inconvenience they had endured. There was nothing I could do to change my mother-in-law's actions. Unable to let go of her obsession with the house, my mother-in-law faced charges and was arrested. I repeatedly apologized to the homeowner, gaining some understanding and vowing that such an incident would never happen again. Raised in a wealthy environment where she could have anything, my mother-in-law's frustration and jealousy over not getting the house led her to commit a crime, ultimately landing her in prison. Ideally, my father-in-law should have supported her, but their relationship deteriorated after her arrest, leading to a forced divorce on his part. Even when she is released, she will have no home to return to. This is the result of her own choices. Despite feeling the loss of my husband, my brother-in-law provided comfort, reminding me that I still have family through him. Although my relationship with my in-laws has ended, I have not completely lost my sense of family. Believing that my husband is watching over me from heaven, I have decided to live my days in peace.
Ignoring the trembling of my own body, I pulled out my mobile phone from my pocket as Mia approached me. I tried to reassure her, saying, "It's going to be okay." But Carly responded, "Mom, we don't need to call an ambulance." The shock of her words hit me like a wave. My name is Katie. I'm 34 years old and work part-time at a call center in the mornings. I met my husband Steve at a high school reunion. By chance, we reconnected, and as we talked, we realized how compatible we were. We began dating soon after, got married 3 years later, and now have a daughter named Mia, who is in the first grade. Since Mia's birth, our living expenses have increased. Driven by a strong desire to support our family, Steve has taken on long overtime hours. Even when he comes home late, I'm deeply grateful for his dedication to us. His work as a pharmacist often means he's home early when I'm sick. He knows all about the medicine and would say, "Tell me where it hurts, and I'll prepare the right remedy for you." He would even give me massages. Steve's support has been a constant. When I was down with a cold, Maya would look worried and say, "Mom, I hope you get better soon." Wanting to recover for her sake, I focus on my treatment. Seeing my pained expression, Maya once asked Steve, "Daddy, can you give Mom the usual magic medicine?" Steve understood and handed me some herbal and cold medicines. At home, we called these magic medicine. Even Mia, who usually disliked medicine, would muster the courage to take it. I'd often felt better the next day, thanks to this magic. "I'll take the magic medicine and get better for Mia," I said, taking the bitter pill. By the next morning, I felt entirely rejuvenated. "Thanks to Mia, I'm all better now," I told her. No, it's thanks to the magic medicine," she replied with a bright smile before heading off to school. "You seem to be feeling much better. I'll head to work now." "Rest up today," Steve said before leaving. Feeling grateful for their concern, I decided to make a lavish dinner that night, hoping it might be mistaken for a special occasion. I began preparing the ingredients. When Maya returned from school around 3, she was ecstatic. My friends and I were talking about the delicious smell in the air. "And it's your cooking, Mom. I can't wait for dinner," she said excitedly and quickly finished her homework. Seeing her happy face made me feel that the extra effort I put into cooking was worth it. As evening approached, I set the table, thinking Steve would be home soon. Maya helped by lining up the drinking glasses. Just then, my cell phone rang. It was Steve. His voice sounded rushed. I was planning to come home early today, but a coworker has a serious personal issue. I want to treat him to dinner and listen to him, so don't worry about dinner for me tonight. I'm really sorry, he said quickly before hanging up. I was left wondering if it was truly that urgent. I called out to Mia. Daddy says he has an important talk with someone from work tonight, so he won't be able to eat dinner with us. It's a pity, but let's just enjoy our meal, just the two of us. Upon hearing this, Maya's face fell. Daddy's not eating even though you worked so hard to make dinner, she said, trying to hide her sadness. Seeing her disappointment made me genuinely upset, but her understanding helped me cope. As long as you eat it, Mia, I'm happy. Thank you for being so understanding, I said. Okay, let's enjoy dinner together then, Maya agreed. We had our meal, washed the dishes, and savored dessert. We spent the evening waiting for Steve, but no matter how long we waited, he didn't come home. I wondered where Daddy was. I had hoped he'd be back for dessert. I'm worried too, but it's getting late, I said to Mia. Let's head to bed. Despite our concerns, Steve didn't return that night, and we went to bed. He didn't come home until around 5 o'clock the next morning. I heard the front door open as I was preparing breakfast and packing lunch boxes. I went to the entrance to find Steve there, looking tired. I'm so sorry, he said immediately. I missed the last train and had to wait for the first one in the morning. I'm really sorry for not coming home. Seeing how significant the issue with his coworker was, I didn't feel like blaming him. Why don't you take a shower first? By the time you're out, breakfast should be ready, I suggested. Thanks, I'll do that, Steve replied. A little later, Maya woke up and the three of us had breakfast together. Maya eagerly told Steve about the meal from last night. Daddy, why didn't you come home? Mom made a really delicious dinner. I'm sorry, Mia, Steve said. I promise I'll be home early today. With that promise, we went our separate ways for the day. After work, I went to the grocery store. I had a simple menu in mind, planning to make an omelette, Maya's favorite. While shopping, I ran into the mother of one of Maya's friends. Oh, Maya's mom. It's been a while. How have you been? She asked. I've been fine, though I've been feeling a bit under the weather lately. Maybe it's my age, I replied. As we chatted, she made an unexpected suggestion. How about inviting Maya over to our house for a sleepover? Don't you think you could use a little time to relax too? Naomi would be thrilled if Maya stayed over. That sounds wonderful. I'm sure Maya would love it. Thank you for the offer, I said. We arranged a date for the sleepover and went our separate ways. When Maya came home in the evening, I shared the news with her. I spoke with Naomi's mom today, and she invited you for a sleepover. Maya's eyes widened with excitement. Really? Can we have a sleepover? Yes, but remember to behave and don't get too excited. They want you to stay over on Saturday. Maya's face lit up with a broad smile, and she immediately began preparing her things. I was relieved that Naomi's mom had suggested the sleepover, and I felt deeply grateful for her kindness. That evening, as promised, Steve came home early. Maya enthusiastically greeted him. Guess what, Dad? I'm going to have a sleepover at Naomi's house this Saturday. Maya shared the news, bouncing around with excitement. I explained to Steve that Naomi's mom had made the offer out of consideration for us. Steve responded, then maybe I'll head out on Saturday. You should take advantage of the free time, enjoy lunch or go shopping, whatever you like. I'll pick Mia up on Sunday. Really? Thank you so much, I said, grateful for his thoughtful suggestion. After dinner, Steve pulled an envelope from his bag. What's that? Maya asked curiously. Steve smiled and said, curious, aren't you? He opened the envelope to reveal a small bag and handed it to me. This is for you. I've noticed you haven't been feeling well lately, so I found some special food that's said to have magical properties. Maya's face lit up. Mom gets sick a lot, but with this she'll get better, right? I felt a mix of slight guilt and deep gratitude. Thank you, Steve. You went out of your way to buy this. It must have been expensive. Your well-being is the top priority, Steve said with a gentle smile. If you take them daily, it will definitely help. He then apologized. I have to admit, from tomorrow until Friday, work's going to be very busy, and I might come home late. Steve's earnest apology made Maya look a bit upset. I was disappointed as well, but I understood he was doing his best for us. I held back my feelings and comforted Mia. Dad is working hard for us. How about we go to the amusement park next time he has a day off? Maya seemed to understand, and Steve gave me a regretful nod. As it was time for bed, I opened the bag Steve had given me. Inside was something I had never seen before, dark-colored and dried. When I tasted it, it had a fruity flavor and was quite delicious. However, later that night, around 2 a.m., I woke up feeling strange. I had a severe headache and an upset stomach. I rushed to the bathroom, realizing that neither Maya nor Steve seemed affected. I pondered what else I had eaten and remembered the special food from Steve. I hadn't asked about the specific benefits or details of the special food Steve gave me, but I suspected it might be the cause of my discomfort. Despite feeling uneasy, I managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, I found that Steve had already left the house. There was a note on the table that read, "Thanks for the lunch. If there are any problems, contact me. See you soon." I debated whether to tell him that the food wasn't quite right for me. It seemed impolite not to mention it, but I didn't want to disturb him at work. I decided to send him a text later. Soon after, Maya woke up. At breakfast, she excitedly talked about her upcoming sleepover at Naomi's house. After we got ready, we both left the house. "Will we see Dad until Friday?" Maya asked. "Probably not," I replied. "He might come home after you're asleep and leave before you wake up. If you want to talk to him about something, maybe you could write him a letter." "Maybe I will," Maya said as we went our separate ways to school and work. When I arrived at the office and started preparing for the day, I received a message from Steve. "Remember to eat it daily. Consistency is key." I replied, asking about the effects of the food. Steve's response came later in the evening. "It's packed with nutrients. Don't worry, it's not harmful." Maybe my frail body overreacted. Though he assured me it was safe, the memory of last night's symptoms made me uneasy about eating it again. Even though it seemed wasteful, I decided not to eat the food Steve had given me. Instead, I resolved to find supplements and healthy foods that suited me better. This morning, on a whim, I used the special food to prepare Steve's lunch. I hoped it would help him stay healthy during his busy days and also avoid wasting the ingredients. Days passed, and there was no change in Steve's condition. He continued his work as usual, which relieved me. It seemed I was the only one who had a reaction. Finally, Saturday arrived. Maya left for her sleepover at Naomi's, picked up by Naomi's mom. Steve went out early for a golf day at a distant resort. I spent a relaxing day shopping, dining out, and unwinding. Every now and then, I received emails from Naomi's mom with updates on Mia. The photos showed Mia and Naomi happily making sweets together. Then came Sunday. I received a message from Steve saying he'd be coming back after watching a new movie with Mia. While I felt a twinge of guilt, I was grateful for Steve's thoughtfulness. They returned home before it got dark, but Maya's usual smile was absent. She seemed subdued, possibly sad to say goodbye to Naomi. Steve remarked, "I think she was having a hard time parting with Naomi." Listening to him, I was reminded of my own childhood. Saying goodbye to friends after special times was always tough. Maya must have really enjoyed her time with Naomi. "How about we invite Naomi over next time?" I suggested to Mia, hoping to lift her spirits and give Naomi's mom a chance to spend more time with her. Maya gave an awkward smile and nodded. As I started preparing dinner with Maya's help, Steve mentioned he was going to take a shower and left the living room. The moment he was out of sight, Maya gently tugged on my sleeve. Just as I was about to ask her what was wrong, a loud crash came from the bathroom. I rushed over and the sight that met me made me scream. Steve was lying on the floor, unmoving. I grabbed my cell phone, trying to steady my trembling hands. With Mia by my side, I attempted to reassure her. "Everything will be okay," I said, but she interrupted with, "Mom, you don't need to call an ambulance." I was shocked by her words and asked, "Why not?" "Because Dad did something bad and he's being punished," she replied. I struggled to understand her meaning, but my priority was to help Steve. I told Mia we'd talk later and immediately call for an ambulance. Thankfully, the quick response meant Steve's life was not in danger, though he had not regained consciousness. Once it was decided that Steve would need to be hospitalized, I made plans to head to the hospital. I thanked everyone who had helped and then left the hospital with Mia. Once we were home, I finally had a chance to ask her about her earlier comments. "Mia, can you explain what you meant earlier?" I asked. She nodded and began, "Naomi told me something during our sleepover." Maya continued, explaining that recently, around bedtime, Naomi had noticed Steve walking in front of their house. Maya seemed puzzled and said, "But isn't that around 9 p.m.? I thought Dad worked a bit later, so it must have been someone else." Naomi had insisted it was definitely Steve. They decided to keep an eye out that night. When bedtime came, Naomi left the room to use the bathroom, and Maya saw someone passing by their house. To her shock, it was indeed Steve, holding hands with an unfamiliar woman and walking together affectionately. Seeing her dad with someone who wasn't me was a huge shock for Mia. She went to sleep without telling Naomi, pretending she hadn't seen anything. The next day, when Steve came to pick up Mia, she couldn't muster a smile, still preoccupied by the previous night's events. Later, when Steve took her to a movie, he mentioned, "Oops, I accidentally bought a ticket for Mom too." Maya forced a smile, trying to ignore his comment. Throughout the movie, Steve seemed distant, giving only half-hearted replies to Mia's attempts to engage him. She overheard him whispering to the strange woman, "Hey, my daughter is right next to us." The woman replied, "It's fine. Eventually she'll be my daughter too. Aren't you happy, Mia? I'm prettier than your mom." Maya was taken aback by the unexpected comment. Steve seemed to signal the woman to stop but continued to enjoy the movie with her. Maya realized that Steve's excuse about mistakenly buying a ticket for me was a lie. It was impossible to pretend everything was fine. Avoiding Steve's gaze, Maya finished her story, and my expression shifted dramatically. I couldn't believe Steve was doing this behind my back. His behavior had seemed normal, and though Maya's story was hard to believe, I knew she wasn't one to lie. In the midst of the confusion, I heard a notification from Steve's phone, which I had accidentally brought with me in the ambulance. Checking the phone, I saw several messages, but one stood out. It detailed how much fun the movie was and how their plan to drive me out was progressing smoothly. My heart sank as I realized Maya's story was true. Steve appeared to be plotting to force me out of our home. Reflecting on Steve's recent behavior, I realized there had been no clear signs that his plan was already in motion. It seemed he had yet to put his scheme into action. Just then, I received a call from the hospital with an update on Steve's condition. Rushing back to the hospital, the doctor explained, "We believe an excessive intake of a particular food caused Steve's symptoms. While he is generally healthy, consuming too much of this substance led to his headaches, stomach issues, and dizziness. Do you know anything about this?" Understanding dawned on me. It seemed that Steve and the woman had been deliberately trying to harm my health by giving me harmful ingredients in large amounts. Their frequent late nights and claims of working overtime were likely lies to cover up their meetings. My anger grew as I pieced together Steve's malicious actions. A nurse soon informed me that Steve had regained consciousness and was now able to talk. With my emotions steadied, I prepared to confront the truth. I decided to visit Steve's hospital room. Thankfully, my parents' home was only a 20-minute drive from the hospital, so I left Mia with my mother, saying, "Mommy needs to have an important talk with Daddy. Stay with Grandma while we talk, okay?" Maya, though silent, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Her young face betrayed a mix of concern and maturity, which only deepened my feelings of guilt for involving her in this mess. My anger towards Steve for his betrayal, especially in front of our daughter, was overwhelming. Standing outside Steve's hospital room, I tried to steady my nerves. Just before knocking, I overheard voices through the door and saw an unfamiliar woman through the window. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cracked the door open slightly to listen. "Even after you collapse, your wife hasn't shown up. How cold-hearted can she be?" One voice sneered. "You should just get a divorce," the woman responded. "She's still around, isn't she? Stubborn." The conversation confirmed my worst fears. This woman was clearly involved in Steve's scheme. Unable to contain my anger, I knocked loudly and swung the door open. Steve and the woman turned to look at me, startled. "Did I interrupt something?" I asked, my voice cold. Their faces went pale. The woman, who had been seated, quickly stood up, attempting to hide her shock. "Oh, you're his wife, right? I'm just a colleague from his office. I'll be on my way now," she said, trying to leave. I wasn't about to let her go that easily. I blocked her path. "Since you've taken the time to visit, why don't you stay a while?" I said with a forced smile. Her uncertainty was palpable. "Yeah, why not stay a bit longer?" I pressed, the tension in the room thickening. Steve tried to play it cool but failed to hide his discomfort. My voice trembled slightly, betraying the intensity of the situation. The woman flinched at the smallest movement from me. I decided not to drag this out and got straight to the point. You're having an affair with her, aren't you? Caught off guard, Steve responded quickly. What are you talking about? That's not true. She's just a coworker. Really? I retorted. So, you're watching movies with just a coworker, bringing our daughter along, and joking about her becoming your future wife? Neither Steve nor the woman could respond. They looked down in shame. I pressed on. And that food I got from you, I tried it, even though I suspected it might not be right for me. I ended up using it in your lunch. Steve's calm demeanor shattered. He shouted, Why would you do that? Is that why I passed out? Really? I had no idea it was that dangerous, I replied. You said it was good and healthy. I just wanted to give you a boost. Well, it looks like your plan to hospitalize me backfired, I said with a smirk. I bet you didn't expect it to be in your own lunch, did you? Steve was left speechless, his expression a mix of devastation and disbelief. I turned to the woman and said, So, you're the one who seduced a married man, aren't you? Don't think you're blameless in this situation. Expect some kind of revenge from me. I glared at her and she faltered, stepping back. Why should I? Steve approached me first. He said he needed comfort. I'm a victim too, she stammered. Oh really? I responded sharply. So, you're saying he initiated everything? In that case, can we see your messages with him? If you're truly the victim, there wouldn't be any explicit advances from you, right? The woman hesitated, clearly realizing her scheme had unraveled. Her tone shifted abruptly. I'm sorry. I apologize. Please just forgive me this once. No matter how much you apologize, I can't forgive this, I said, my voice steady. I turned and walked out, leaving the two of them pale and tearful. I returned to my parents' house where Maya was waiting. Welcome back. Maya's been such a good girl. Thank you for taking care of her on such short notice, my mother said warmly. I took a deep breath and explained, I'm planning on divorcing Steve. Is it alright if we stay here for a while? My mother's initial shock quickly turned into support as I recounted the whole story. That's what happened then. Stay here. I'll help you get your things. Don't worry, she said firmly, offering both me and Maya her unwavering support. Her kindness touched me deeply, and tears welled up in my eyes. I carefully explained the situation to Mia. Daddy was close with someone else besides Mommy, and I don't like him anymore. I'd rather stay here with Grandma. Despite her young age, Maya seemed to grasp the seriousness of Steve's actions. Thank you, Mia. From now on, I'll protect your smile for both of us, I promised her. Later, when my father returned from work, we went to the house we had shared with Steve. We quickly packed up our things and left. After the dramatic events, Steve was discharged from the hospital. When he came home, my father and I went to discuss matters with him. As soon as Steve saw me, he immediately apologized. I'm truly sorry. I've realized that Katie and Maya are my treasures. I'll completely cut ties with that woman. Please forgive me. Despite his belated remorse, my heart had hardened. I can't imagine getting back with someone who planned to betray me. Please sign the affidavit of the defendant from the court, I said, my irritation evident. My father, standing behind me, added, Listen, Steve, I can't let my precious daughter live with someone like you. If you care about Katie and Maya's future, you need to finalize the divorce quickly. Faced with my father's stern words, Steve agreed, tears streaming down his face. I'll be seeking property division and compensation from you and that woman, so be prepared. This isn't over, I said coldly before leaving with my father. In the following days, I received a substantial amount of money from Steve and the woman for child support and living expenses. News of their affairs spread quickly through their company, severely damaging their reputations. Overwhelmed by the negative publicity, the woman resigned and soon found herself burdened with debt from her payments to me. Steve's prospects for promotion disappeared, and his reputation plummeted. He was increasingly shunned by everyone. Meanwhile, I transitioned from part-time to full-time work, dedicating myself even more to my job. My hard work was recognized, leading to an increase in my salary and a more fulfilling life. Maya's happiness became my top priority, and I am committed to supporting her so that we can enjoy each day together. Even though we hadn't seen each other for a month, Sean said nothing about my health. Instead, he simply demanded a divorce. I want a divorce from a wife who neither does household chores nor works. Don't expect any share of the property, he said with a smirk. Jessica stood beside him, grinning and clinging to his arm. All right, a divorce it is, I replied calmly. Scene looked surprised, but then he and Jessica exchanged smiles. Thankfully, Scene's thoughtless nature worked to my advantage, allowing my plan to proceed smoothly. After the divorce, I began executing my revenge plan against them. By the time it was complete, my health should have improved, and their regretful faces would be my victory. I'm Sophie, 47 years old, an illustrator and picture book author. Drawing has always been my passion. I have 2 childhood friends, Sean and Jessica, both very important to me. Sean is also my husband. It all started after high school when I was the only one who went to a different university. That's when Sean asked me out. I had always thought he had feelings for Jessica, so his confession took me by surprise. I was secretly in love with him, so I was overjoyed. Before starting our relationship, I consulted Jessica. She had always been somewhat of a troublemaker, often coveting what belonged to others and causing issues which worried her parents. Despite this, Sean and I tried to include her in our lives as much as possible. I married Sean at 25, but 4 years later, Jessica suddenly introduced her fiancé Matt. He was a well-mannered man who quickly became close with us. We spent holidays together, enjoying trips and discovering our favorite drinks. I thought our relationship was solid, but about 2 years after Jessica and Matt's marriage, things began to deteriorate. The trouble started when Jessica became pregnant. Sean and I had decided not to have children. We liked kids but preferred to focus on our hobbies, such as drinking and traveling. We admired families with children but were content without them. However, Sean's behavior changed dramatically after learning about Jessica's pregnancy. He quit smoking, which he had stubbornly refused to do for my sake, just because Jessica mentioned the smell. He even took paid leave to drive her to the hospital, clearly going beyond what a childhood friend would do. You know, if you stay too close to Jessica, Matt might feel uncomfortable. I warned him. You're busy, right? It's terrible how indifferent you are, even when a pregnant friend needs help. He retorted, I'm trying to help out. I do the shopping and run errands. I think accompanying Jessica to the gynecologist is a bit much, though. I argued, if she's scared, she should have Matt go with her. Going with her every time makes it seem like you're the child's father. You're not going to be pregnant anytime soon, so what does it matter? Sean dismissed my concerns. We rarely fought before, but since Jessica's pregnancy, our arguments increased. This tension continued after Jessica's delivery, with Sean spending more time with her and her child. When Maya turned 5, an incident occurred the night before her preschool graduation. Sean was rummaging through the bedroom closet. What's wrong? Do you have a business dinner tomorrow? I asked, noticing his suit thrown carelessly on the bed. His workplace had a casual dress code except for formal meetings. No, I'm deciding what to wear for the graduation ceremony, he replied. Wait, you're planning to attend Mia's graduation? I protested loudly. Matt can't make it, and Jessica asked me to come, he said. That's just wrong, I protested, causing Sean's expression to sour. I was aware that Scene sometimes picked up Mia from preschool, and I had also helped out occasionally. That level of assistance was acceptable, but it seemed out of place for a father's friend to attend a graduation ceremony in his stead, even if they were childhood friends. Are you still questioning my relationship with Jessica? Scene asked, disappointment in his voice. You can't be more supportive. It's not about that, I replied firmly. Regardless of what you say, I'm going to the ceremony tomorrow. Don't forget to iron my shirt. With that, Scene abruptly ended the conversation. Left with no other option, I reached out to Jessica. Hello, Jessica. About tomorrow? Oh, tomorrow? Yeah. I'm borrowing Scene, Jessica interrupted. Thanks, but won't Matt mind? I asked, concerned. What are you talking about, Sophie? I haven't even told Matt about the graduation. I'll let him know after it's over, she said. I was stunned. Jessica hadn't informed Matt about any preschool events, and it seemed like Sean was being passed off as the father. What are you thinking? This is incredibly disrespectful to Matt, just because you and Sean are childhood friends. Hey, what's wrong? You sound kind of scary, Jessica said. Well then, I'm counting on you for tomorrow, she added before abruptly hanging up. Fuming with anger, I still ended up ironing Scene's shirt, preparing his tie, and sending him off properly to Maya's graduation ceremony the next morning. After this incident, Jessica and Scene began spending more time together. What had been a monthly occurrence soon turned into weekly outings, and before long, they were meeting every 2 days. Matt seemed to notice something was off. One evening, when Scene and Jessica were out, Matt came to my house. "I'm sorry for dropping by so late, but something's been bothering me," he said. "Is it about those two?" I asked. "Yes," Matt replied, showing me GPS records he'd installed in Jessica's car. The records revealed that they had visited a lodging facility about 3 times a week, always on days when Scene was out with Jessica. The implication was clear from Matt's expression. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I want to take revenge on them," Matt said. "I can't forgive them for betraying us after all this time." I felt the same way. We secretly began planning our revenge against Scene and Jessica. My first step was to focus on increasing my income. After getting married, I had reduced my work to focus on household duties, which significantly lowered my income. Matt transitioned to working from home, and whenever Jessica and Scene were out, he would bring Maya to my house so we could take care of her together. Unaware of our arrangement, Jessica and Scene made it easy to gather evidence against them. Just as we were ready to execute our revenge plan, we were stunned to learn the truth about Mia. After much deliberation, Matt and I decided to postpone our revenge until Maya reached adulthood. We didn't want to hurt her while she was still young. However, 10 years later, I was struck by a serious illness. It wasn't unusual for me to be hospitalized for a year or two, and though I could work from the hospital, I had to significantly reduce my workload. I immediately informed Matt of my situation and discussed it with Scene. "I see. I'll come to visit you sometimes," Scene replied casually, showing no real concern for my condition. His indifferent attitude made it painfully clear that he no longer cared about me. It seemed true, as he visited only once or twice a month. As time passed and Maya turned 15, she had been visiting me almost every day since my hospitalization. However, after her 15th birthday, something felt off. I asked Matt if he knew anything, but he didn't seem to know either. When I inquired with Mia, she simply told me not to worry about it. We were left in suspense, but the truth was eventually revealed by Scene, who unexpectedly came to visit me in the hospital. "Hey, it's been a while," Scene said as he entered the room without knocking. It had indeed been a month since we last saw each other. During that time, Scene had changed significantly, becoming quite flashy. Jessica followed him in, showing no concern for my health. "I'm divorcing you," Scene announced. "You don't do housework or have a job, and there will be no division of property. Sophie, please take care of this," he said with a smirking smile, while Jessica clung to his arm. "All right, a divorce it is," I replied calmly. Scene was surprised by my readiness but quickly exchanged smiles with Jessica. Scene's straightforward nature played to my advantage, allowing my plan to proceed without any issues. After the divorce was finalized, I began my revenge plan. By the time it was complete, I hoped my illness would have improved, and their regretful faces would be my reward. I called Matt to inform him of my transfer to another hospital and that a lawyer would handle any dealings with Scene and Jessica. Matt moved closer to my new hospital and continued bringing Maya to visit me regularly. Despite Mia's sadness, her daily visits brought me immense joy. Meanwhile, I instructed Jan to dispose of the belongings I had left behind in my house. I had already moved all my personal belongings to the hospital room and wanted to ensure that nothing was touched by Scene or Jessica. After settling into my new hospital and Matt's relocation, I received a call from Scene. Despite only being away from my room for a few minutes, I found 30 missed calls on my smartphone. Annoyed, I answered when the phone rang again. "Yes, what is it?" I said. "Hey, what the heck is going on?" Scene's voice was agitated, and I could hear a confused real estate agent and Jessica yelling in the background. My mood darkened further. "What do you mean? What's going on?" I replied. "The house. Why are we being kicked out?" Scene demanded, raising his voice and clearly refusing to acknowledge any responsibility. I remained calm. Of course, after everything that's happened, it's only natural that the room I rented would be canceled. "You seem to have forgotten that the space we lived in was rented by me for work. When I started working independently, I couldn't afford a separate workspace, so I rented a room that served both as a home and an office." Scene, whose income was insufficient to live alone, ended up living in that space. However, he never paid rent or utility bills for the room. While he did provide monthly living expenses, they were never enough to cover the costs of maintaining the space. It's unfortunate, but the room is no longer available. The hospital I transferred to was quite far from the house, and after the divorce was finalized, I had no intention of continuing any ties with the property. I proceeded with the cancellation process without contacting Scene, as the real estate agent who understood the situation had promised to handle it for me. It seemed that Matt and Maya had also suddenly disappeared, and their house might have been sold. What are we supposed to do now? Where will we live? Scene's frustration was evident. Well, you might have to stay in a business hotel for the time being, I suggested, starting to work on my smartphone with the speaker mode on. Scene, clearly irritated, demanded, "Don't be ridiculous. Pay me $2,000 a month as an apology for selling the house." I was taken aback by his unreasonable demand and stayed silent. Scene's voice grew louder. "Hey, don't just stay quiet." I coldly responded, "No way am I paying you any money." Scene looked momentarily stunned but quickly raised his voice again. "My patience was wearing thin. We're divorced and no longer have any ties. Don't contact me anymore. We'll communicate through our lawyers from now on. Wait for their contact." "What? A lawyer? Hey, wait, Scene tried to continue, but I cut off the call, no longer interested in his complaints. After ignoring several repeated calls, they eventually stopped. Scene, perhaps annoyed by my silence, began avoiding any contact from the lawyer as well. His childish behavior was frustrating, but I had expected it. Months later, after a temporary improvement in my health, I visited Scene's parents' home. Scene and Jessica were there, looking anxious. "You're being unfair talking to my parents like this," Scene said. "I just came to inform them of the divorce," I replied. Scene glared at me for a moment, but then shrank under his father's stern gaze. I had been close to Scene's parents. We often went out and had meals together even when Scene wasn't present. Given how well they treated me, I felt it was important to explain the situation. "Scene, I've heard everything from Sophie. Is it true that you're remarrying Jessica?" Scene's father asked. "Yes, Jessica, Mia, and I are starting a new family together," Scene replied. "What are you thinking? Your family is Sophie. She's not your family anymore," his father said, frowning. Scene shook his head, seemingly resigned, and handed me some documents. "These are the bills from a luxury hotel we stayed at." "What's this?" I asked, confused. "It's the bill for the hotel," Scene said, pointing at the documents as if it were obvious. But before I could respond, his mother slapped him, causing him to fall to the ground. She stood there, panting, her hands still raised. "What are you doing? I didn't raise you to behave like this," she said. Scene's furrowed brow indicated his shock at his mother's reaction. Jessica beside him wore a similar look of confusion. "Why are you so upset? Scene's family is just going through some changes. Plus, you're getting a grandchild related by blood. Aren't you happy about that?" "Related by blood? You can't be serious," I replied, staring at Jessica in disbelief. My in-laws had always treated me as their own daughter, even though they knew I didn't want children. They had also cherished Jessica as she was my son's childhood friend. I knew my mother-in-law would be deeply displeased with the situation, and Jessica should have understood that. "You've always loved Mia. Now she's going to be your granddaughter. You should be happy about that," Jessica said. "She's the child of someone I've known since she was little. Of course she's dear to me. But she's also Scene's child," I responded. Jessica showed no sign of remorse and seemed genuinely puzzled by her lack of understanding, which was unsettling. Then Mia, who had been silently fiddling with her smartphone in the corner, spoke up. "Stop it. It's disgusting," Maya said without looking up. "My father is only my dad. Whether or not we're related by blood doesn't matter. Scene attended all the events for you. I know all about them from Dad, who always said I was his daughter. I'm his daughter, not yours." Mia then sat next to me, on the verge of tears. "I was worried you'd hate me when you found out, but Dad assured me you wouldn't. That's why I came here." "I see, Mia. I loved having you visit me in the hospital every day," I said, embracing her. "I could never hate you. I love you very much, Mia." As I spoke, Mia, visibly relieved, hugged me tightly. Despite the fact that Maya was the child of Sean and Jessica's affair, she was the girl I had cared for over the past 15 years. It was impossible not to feel affection for her. Turning to Jessica, I asked, "Didn't you find it odd that I wasn't surprised to learn Mia is Sean's daughter?" Jessica gasped in surprise as another person entered the room, Matt. His sudden appearance clearly unsettled Jessica. She had been seeking a divorce from Matt recently, citing irreconcilable differences. "I was truly shocked when you proposed divorce. Let me remind you that we're still not divorced. You haven't filed for it," Matt said, addressing Jessica. Jessica had assumed Matt would handle all the divorce proceedings, which was typical of her tendency to leave everything to others. So Jessica is still my wife, and Maya is still my daughter. After the divorce, she won't be my wife anymore, but Maya will always be my daughter. Jessica turned to Mia, who frowned and clutched my hand tightly. I don't want to be her daughter anymore, Maya said firmly. Jessica was at a loss for words and glared at me angrily. Meanwhile, Sean began laughing loudly. I see, so you two are like that, but even so, you can't live on Matt's income alone. Don't misunderstand, I interjected calmly. Matt's income is actually twice what Jessica thinks it is. Sean scoffed. No way. You're joking. Plus, with your illness, it's impossible for you to work alone. It'll just be a miserable end. Sean's misunderstanding made me laugh, which only fueled his anger. Oh, you didn't know about my income? I asked. Sean replied dismissively, it's probably not much anyway. Actually, I make $900,000 a year, I stated. Sean's eyes widened, and he stood there, mouth agape in shock. Jessica was equally motionless. Over the past 10 years, I had gained recognition as a children's book author. I had published essays, been interviewed, and soon one of my works would be made into a movie. My income had skyrocketed. That's a lie. It's not possible, Jessica said. I showed Jessica my smartphone, displaying my bank account deposit records. The large monthly deposits left her speechless. Hey Sophie, let's try again, Sean said, but his desperation was palpable. I watched their reaction with a detached gaze. If you two are planning to remarry, feel free. It's your life, I said, ignoring Sean's protests. Holding Maya's hand, I greeted my in-laws and left their house. Later, I learned that Sean, who had been working at my father-in-law's company, was often out under the guise of business and eventually got fired. He tried to contact me several times, but I reported it to my father-in-law, which led him to stop reaching out. Jessica, after divorcing and losing custody, seemed to lose interest in Sean, who could no longer afford luxuries. She stopped pursuing him and was disowned by her family. With no full-time job prospects and a tendency to push responsibilities onto others, she struggled to find stable employment and was getting by on multiple part-time jobs. Since starting high school, Maya had been diligently studying every day with hopes of attending a prestigious university abroad in the future. Her serious personality led her to express a dream of translating my picture books and spreading them around the world. As for myself, the picture books I had illustrated were being adapted into an anime, and I was receiving proposals for merchandise. My health was steadily improving, though I remained hospitalized. My doctor mentioned that I might be able to be discharged next year. With hopeful anticipation for our future, I continued to write stories every day.